Chapter 1630. Tianlei had completely fallen, and the dark clouds had dispersed. The flames around him also dissipated bit by bit. Only the armor in front of him was left shining brightly. Although the armor was enveloped by a ball of light, outsiders couldn't see it clearly. However, that vast and powerful aura was impossible to ignore. Elder Wu Peng and the others fell into a dead silence. They all knew very well that it was indeed a King Divine weapon. This man actually, really only used one day. No. In just one night he had crafted an emperor artifact. Although they were already mentally prepared, when they really witnessed everything with their own eyes, the shock in their hearts was still indescribable. Xiao waved his wrist lightly, and that ball of light fell into his hand and disappeared. At this moment the sky was about to brighten, and the surroundings were shrouded in a faint layer of fog, making it hazy. Dressed in white, he stood in the misty fog, looking even more like an immortal, elegant and outstanding. Nanyi was a little stunned. At this moment he suddenly turned around and walked over. His footsteps were light and calm, but every step seemed to be stepping on Nanyi's heart. Nanyi subconsciously held her breath and her entire body tensed up. His heart thumped wildly and his face seemed to be on fire. She had never thought that a man who she couldn't even see clearly could control her emotions so easily. The distance between them was getting closer and closer. Nan Yuxing looked at Nanyi and saw her staring blankly ahead. He wanted to speak. However, when the words were about to come out of his mouth, he suddenly couldn't say it. He had never seen his sister reveal such an expression for anyone before. Although he was usually a little strict with her, he still doted on her in his heart. She really liked him. As long as the other party had a decent background, such good looks and talent as a weapon refiner, she might consider him. At the thought of this, he took a step forward and cupped his hands politely. "Sir, please wait." Xiao didn't stop, as if he didn't hear him at all. Nan Yuxing frowned. This man did have the right to be arrogant. But it wouldn't be good if he went overboard. He took a few steps forward and blocked Xiao's path. Xiao then stopped, looked up and glanced at the other man. Nan Yuxing's heart skipped a beat. This man's eyes were deep and serene, like a bottomless cold lake. And this gaze was extremely cold and indifferent. It was as if the person standing in front of him was not a living person, but an insignificant object. This gaze made Nan Yuxing very uncomfortable. However, he was no longer a greenhorn, so he could still control his emotions. The smile on his face did not change. "Your Excellency, please don't misunderstand. We have no ill intentions. I am Nan Yuxing. Seeing that you are already a king of blacksmiths at such a young age, I am very impressed. I wonder if we can be friends in the future." "No need." Before he could finish, Xiao had already given him a straightforward answer. After saying that, Xiao took a step, bypassed him and continued to move forward. Nan Yuxing was still in a daze. It was rare for him to take the initiative to build a relationship with someone, but he was rejected. Usually, countless people wanted to talk to him and make friends with him, but they might not have the chance. This man actually, he was so angry that he laughed and turned around. "You are so arrogant." Although he was laughing, the sarcasm in his words couldn't be clearer. Xiao didn't even stop in his tracks. Nan Yuxing finally couldn't maintain his expression. Before he could flare up, Nanyi had already rushed forward. "Wait." She jogged over and quickly rushed in front of Xiao. A change finally appeared in Xiao's indifferent expression. His brows furrowed slightly and a hint of impatience appeared between his brows. Nanyi looked up and saw his face. For a moment her mind was almost blank. Previously she hadn't been able to see his face clearly, but now that they were only a few steps apart she could see him clearly. His sharp eyebrows reached his temples, his phoenix-like eyes were as deep as the sea, his nose bridge was high and his crimson lips were like the first color of spring. It was clearly an extremely cold and distant face, but there was a hint of spring in it. For a moment he was as cold as a fairy, but in the blink of an eye he was as charming as a demon. He could really be called a peerless beauty in the world. Suddenly the words that Nanyi had prepared were stuck in her throat and she couldn't say them. This face had such a huge impact on her that she didn't notice the impatience in Xiao's eyes. "Move aside." Xiao spoke. His voice was as cold as ice, but it also had a noble aura that couldn't be disobeyed. Almost instinctively, Nanyi took a step to the side. Seeing this scene, Nan Yuxing was furious. His sister had always been fearless. Their entire family treated her like the apple of their eye, afraid that she would be aggrieved if they bumped into her. In the end, not only did this man not give her any face, he even directly ordered her to move aside. Nan Yuxing's figure flashed. In the blink of an eye, he appeared beside Nan Yi. He pulled Nan Yi behind him and took a step forward with a sneer. Is the king of weapon refinement really so amazing? We are kind enough to befriend you, why do you have to be so high and mighty? He had only given Yi some face because she liked him. Unfortunately, the other party didn't seem to appreciate it. Refusing a toast only to be forced to drink a forfeit. Rong Xiu didn't have any patience for outsiders, let alone these people who had once wanted to find trouble with him. He finally looked straight at Nan Yuxing. At this moment, Nan Yuxing suddenly felt a chill run down his spine. Rong Xiu's expression was languid and his voice was extremely indifferent. You've delayed my visit to my wife. Every word and sentence was filled with chilling intent. Digression. Has everyone seen the news of the change in monthly votes? To put it simply, you will have to spend more Xiaoxiang dollars to get a monthly vote in the future. Moreover, each person can only give a maximum of 5 monthly votes to a book every month. There is also a limit to the number of votes per day. Non-top scorers are allowed 2 votes per day, and top scorers are allowed 5 votes per day. But the limit is 5 votes per month. If you have monthly votes, please vote as soon as possible. The change will be official in 3 days. You won't be able to bury February with a handful of monthly votes anymore. The star of monthly votes will also be changed to the star of reviews. Mobile users, please browse and read. A better reading experience comes from Love Network. Chapter 1631. A coldness surged from the bottom of his heart, causing Nan Yuxing to feel cold all over. However, Nan Yi's attention was on a certain word. Madam? He was already married? Nan Yi's heart instantly turned cold, as if a basin of cold water had been poured over her head. Rong Xiu. At this moment, a clear female voice sounded from behind. Nan Yuxing and Nan Yi saw the man who had spoken coldly and mercilessly to them just a moment ago, looking straight ahead. In an instant, the frost in his eyes melted rapidly. What replaced it was an unconcealable gentleness and gentleness. His scarlet lips curved slightly, and there seemed to be a stream of light flickering in his deep phoenix eyes. The aura around him also became completely different. You're awake? As he spoke, he directly walked past the brother and sister and walked over. A faint cold fragrance swept past her nose. Nan Yi turned around in a daze and looked in the direction he had gone. Not far away, behind a few stones, stood a woman. That woman was dressed in a red dress and looked to be only 17 or 18 years old. Her skin was as fair as snow. Her eyebrows were like distant mountains and her eyes were as bright as the stars. She was only dressed in a simple red dress and her black hair was simply tied up. There were no extra accessories on her body, and as she stood there, she seemed to be more beautiful than a myriad of magnificent scenes. There was a smile on her lips, but her entire body was enveloped in an incomparably noble aura, revealing a noble aura from her bones. In this misty white fog, she appeared especially beautiful and devastatingly beautiful. The moment she saw the other party's face clearly, Nan Yi was stunned at first, then she couldn't help but feel sour and jealous in her heart. She had always flaunted her beauty, but in front of this woman, it was the first time she felt ashamed of her inferiority. Even if she didn't want to admit it, she knew very well that the other party's beauty was indeed much better than hers. Nan Yi couldn't help but look down at herself. Her clothes were luxurious and she was particular about everything. But at this moment, in contrast to the other party, she started to feel that her outfit was very cumbersome. Even when she lowered her head, the jingling, dangling hair ornament on her head made her feel vexed. She was dressed up so exquisitely, but it was not as moving as the other party's bare face. Any woman would feel uncomfortable. Rong Xiu had already walked over and tucked the strands of hair by her cheek behind her ear. His movements were skillful and natural. He looked at the person in front of him, his voice low and pleasant. Did you rest well? Did I disturb you? Chu Liwei shook his head and smiled. Oh, actually, I woke up when you were refining just now. Rong Xiu frowned slightly and glanced at Shang Guanjing behind him. Shangguan shrugged helplessly. With such a huge commotion, even a barrier wouldn't be able to stop it. Originally, before Rongxiu prepared to refine, he was worried that he would disturb her rest, so he specially set up a layer of enchantment. But from the looks of it now, it should be useless. She had always been sensitive to these things, so it was impossible for her not to have noticed it. Rongxiu raised his eyebrows slightly and a smile appeared in his eyes. He took out a ball of light and handed it over. Take a look. Chu Luiyue took the item and a hint of surprise flashed across her eyes. She knew that Rongxiu was extremely talented in refining weapons. It wasn't that the two of them had never competed in this aspect before. But she basically lost. Moreover, she had never tested Rongxiu's true strength. This was the first time she had seen Rongxiu refine an Emperor Divine weapon with her own eyes. Others might not be able to see it clearly, but this thing was in her hands now, so she could see it clearly. It was a suit of armor. The entire body was a faint golden color, but the texture looked more like jade, but it was extremely light in the hand. You can drip blood directly to recognize it as your master. Rongxiu said. Chu Luiyue nodded slightly, took out a dagger and cut her palm. Dark red blood immediately gushed out. It dripped on the armor. The armor flickered with light, and the blood was quickly swallowed and absorbed, disappearing on the surface of the armor. Extremely thin blood-colored patterns appeared inside. In an instant, Chu Luiyue sensed that there seemed to be some kind of connection between her and the armor. After that, with a flash of light, the armor quickly disappeared. Chu Luiyue blinked. The wound on her hand quickly healed, leaving only a faint pink scar. A faint layer of golden light enveloped Chu Luiyue's body, but it quickly disappeared. But she knew very well that the armor had already recognized her as its master. Then she seemed to have sensed something and her eyes widened slightly as she looked at Rongxiu. Do you like it? Rongxiu asked with a smile. Chu Luiyue's words were suddenly stuck in her throat. After a moment she nodded seriously. I like everything you give me. The scene of the two talking and laughing as if there was no one else around deeply provoked Nanyi. She couldn't help but take a step forward. You gave her the King Divine weapon that you worked so hard to refine so easily. A cold glint flashed across Rongxiu's eyes. Chu Luiyue blinked and looked at the other party for the first time. In fact, she had seen and heard the scene of the siblings blocking Rongxiu just now. It was obvious that this woman had taken a fancy to Rongxiu. Otherwise, she wouldn't have been so unforgiving. Do you know how much effort he put in to refine this? You actually accepted it with a clear conscience? As if sensing Chu Luiyue's gaze, Nan Yi directly aimed the cannon at Chu Luiyue. No matter what, that was a King Divine weapon. She gave it away so easily. Looking at Nan Yi's agitated and resentful appearance, Chu Luiyue was a little amused. She raised her brows and was about to speak, but Rongxiu had already turned around. Firstly, this is a divine weapon that I refined. It's my business how I want to deal with it. Since when is it your turn to interfere? Nan Yi shuddered from his cold gaze and her rebuttal became softer. But, secondly, this is a gift that I specially prepared for Madame. If I don't give it to her, do I have to give it to you? Rongxiu enunciated every word, and his face seemed to be covered with a layer of frost. Being stared at by his intimidating gaze, Nan Yi finally sensed a trace of danger. She opened her mouth but didn't say anything. Nan Yuxing was angry and heartbroken. He immediately stepped forward and stared at her warningly before pulling her behind him. His sister was used to being arrogant and spoke as she pleased. Even he felt embarrassed when he heard what she said just now. But this was his sister after all. How could he let her be bullied when she was outside? Nan Yuxing took a deep breath. My sister didn't mean that. You. Rongxiu didn't have any patience with the siblings and directly interrupted him. He stared coldly at Nanyi. Thirdly, who do you think you are? How dare you criticize my wife? Mobile users, please browse and read. A better reading experience comes from Love Network. Chapter 1632. The last sentence successfully caused the expressions of the siblings to change. Nan Yuxing was both shocked and furious. He was shocked because he didn't expect the other party to be so impudent. He was angry because that man had actually said such humiliating and contemptuous words to his sister. Nanny's eyes widened in disbelief. She had been pampered and spoiled since she was young. Not to mention insults, she had never even heard a harsh word from anyone. Now that she was suddenly pointed at and scolded, she naturally took a long time to regain her senses. After she regained her senses, her face quickly flushed red. Something seemed to be surging crazily in her chest and was about to burst out from her chest. You, she wanted to refute, but even her voice was trembling. Because her emotions were very complicated at this moment. It was the first time she liked someone, but she didn't expect the other party to say such words before she could express her feelings. The impact was so great that she didn't even have time to be angry. She was completely stunned. Nanyuxing hurriedly turned around to look at her. When he saw her expression, his heart ached. When had his precious sister ever suffered such grievances? Sir, aren't you going overboard with your words? Nanyuxing raised his voice and the aura around him began to surge. He only said a few words casually, but you're so rude. Is bullying a woman like this something a man should do? Rongxiao's brows moved slightly. She said all those things and she deserves it. Instead of criticizing others here, why don't you go back and think about how to change your precious sister's bad habit of speaking without thinking? The other party had offended him time and time again, and he was already impatient with them. If it weren't for the fact that he still had to refine this armor, he would have already been rude to them yesterday. Nanyuxing was so angry that smoke was coming out of his 7 orifices. It had been a long time since he met such an arrogant and impudent person. Yes, such a young king of weapon refinement was indeed outstanding. But this didn't mean that they were afraid of him. Looks like you don't intend to apologize? He asked gloomily. In his words, there was already an unconcealable murderous intent surging. When Nanyi saw this, she hurriedly went forward and grabbed his arm. Brother, what are you doing? Nanyuxing frowned. He humiliated you, so I naturally planned to teach him a lesson and help you vent your anger. Of course Nanyi knew what he meant. In the past she had often asked Big Brother for help. But it was different this time. If Big Brother beat him up, then wouldn't the other party really see her as an enemy? She was angry, aggrieved, and furious. However, he didn't want to completely fall out with the other party because of this. Big Brother had always been ruthless. If he killed or crippled someone, it's not his fault. Why did you hit him? Nanyi bit her lip and looked at Chu Luiwei with resentment. The look in his eyes was very clear. If there was someone to blame, it should be her. If it wasn't for protecting her, he definitely wouldn't have done this. Chu Luiwei? She hadn't even said a single word from the start to the end, and this hat was actually placed on her head? How could Nanyuxing not know what his sister was thinking? It was nothing more than reluctance. Nanyuxing really expected better from her. His words were already so harsh and his attitude was so clear, but she still refused to come to her senses. At this time she was still speaking up for him? What the hell? He originally wanted Nanyi to step back and make a move himself. However, Nanyi hugged his arm tightly and refused to let go. Nanyuxing was angry and frustrated. In the end, he could only grit his teeth and hit Nanyi's head hard. In the past, he only thought that she was a little delicate and willful, but he didn't know that she could go to such an extent for a man. He was really disappointed. The atmosphere between the siblings fell into a stalemate. Eldest young master, 2nd Mississippi. It's daybreak and the poisonous gas in the Scarlet Soul Forest has dissipated. It's time to go in. Elder Wu Peng spoke at the right time to break the stalemate. Elder Bai Tong also hurriedly acted as a peacemaker. Yes. The time it takes to pass through the Scarlet Soul Forest is very short. Young master, miss, we have to hurry. The two of them said this to give them a way out. Nanyuxing grabbed Nanyi's wrist and headed in the direction of the Scarlet Soul Forest. Let's go. They were here because they had something important to do. As for that man who didn't know what was good for him, when everything was over they would think of a way to deal with him. Nanyi's wrist hurt from being grabbed and she frowned. However, she knew that her elder brother was angry at this moment and didn't dare to say anything. He could only follow them. The two elders also followed one after the other. When the two sides brushed past each other, Elder Wu Peng gave Rongxiao a meaningful look. Rongxiao's expression was indifferent and calm, as if he didn't take them seriously at all. Chu Liwei blinked and looked at the few people's back view. Rongxiao was considered famous in the Divine Ruins world and many big shots had seen him before. These two people seemed to be of high status, but they didn't seem to know Rong Xiu. What are you thinking about? Rong Xiu's voice sounded. Chu Luiyue looked back thoughtfully. Nothing, I just feel that their background doesn't seem simple. The four of them concealed their auras very well, but her intuition told her that they shouldn't be weak. More importantly, they had witnessed Rong Xiu refining a king divine weapon with their own eyes, but they didn't seem to be very shocked. One had to know that the people from the major sects and families had directly fallen out with Lingshao College in order to fight for the Scarlet Heaven Sword in Blue Feather's Abyss. At that time they had thought that the Scarlet Heaven Sword was a king divine weapon. It could be seen how important and noble a king divine weapon was to these people, so much so that they would pay a huge price to fight for it. But these people, from the beginning to the end, they didn't seem to covet the king divine weapon at all. In this situation they either knew that they couldn't win, so they didn't even have any thoughts about it, or this thing wasn't that precious to them. Judging from their arrogant attitude, it shouldn't be the first case. But if it was the second case, then it would be interesting. Chu Luiyue had been in the Divine Ruins world for a long time and knew that king divine weapons were extremely precious to many families, even first-rate families. What kind of background did these people have? They were actually like this. That black-clothed old man should be a weapon refining supremacy. Shangguan Jing retracted his gaze and muttered. Just now he had been staying behind a few stones and the conflict had been between Rong Xiu and Chu Luiyue, so those people didn't pay much attention to him. A weapon refining supremacy is the follower of those two? Chu Luiyue raised her eyebrows slightly. Interesting. Mobile users, please browse and read. A better reading experience comes from the Love Network. Chapter 1633. She stretched out her finger and gently tapped Rong Xiu's chest. She smiled mischievously. Rong Xiu, maybe she really is a young lady from a certain family and has an extraordinary background. Even a girl like her fell in love with you at first sight. It's clear that you're still as powerful as before. Back then Rong Xiu was still a young man. He was still a bit immature, but he was already the dream boy of countless girls. On the first day he entered Lingshao College, he attracted the attention of almost half of the girls in the college. Now that a few years had passed, he had grown from a young man to a man. His appearance was enchanting and his temperament was noble. Even Chu Luiyue couldn't help but sigh in her heart. This man's every movement was even more magnificent than before. Rong Xiu glanced at her indifferently, grabbed her hand and suddenly moved closer. The two breathed together and they could almost feel each other's hot breath. A cold fragrance lingered around them, adding to the charm and gentleness. The two clearly didn't move closer. Being stared at by Rong Xiu's bottomless eyes and enveloped by his aura, Chu Luiyue inexplicably felt her face heat up. His movements were very restrained and polite. Only she knew how unbridled and aggressive his gaze was at this moment. Chu Luiyue's heart suddenly skipped a beat. His gaze was so intense that it almost forced her to subconsciously turn her face away. Do you smell something? Rong Xiu suddenly asked. His voice had always been deep and pleasant. At this moment the two of them were very close. He deliberately lowered his voice so it was more like he was whispering into her ear. Chu Luiyue felt as if she was even hotter. What's that smell? Rong Xiu raised his eyebrows. So sour. Chu Luiyue suddenly came back to her senses. She glared at him angrily, then pushed him away. She snorted and turned to leave. A certain someone was really getting more and more arrogant. Rong Xiu was pushed away, but he was not angry. He only laughed. Chu Luiyue instantly quickened his pace. Only then did Rong Xiu lift his feet and follow him unhurriedly. Do you really not smell it? Chu Luiyue pretended not to hear anything. Shangguan Jing looked at the sky speechlessly. He smelled the sour stench of love. Soon, Nan Yuxing and the others arrived at the Scarlet Soul Forest. Just as he was about to enter, he heard footsteps behind him. Nan Yuxing turned around and frowned. Why are they here? He felt even more disgusted and couldn't help but sneer. You were so arrogant just now, why are you chasing after me now? I'm telling you in advance that we won't pursue the matter from before for the sake of my little sister. But if you continue to pester us, don't blame us for being impolite. Chu Luiyue looked at him strangely. This, young master, are you misunderstanding something? We're just going to pass through the Red Soul Forest and enter the God-slaying tomb. We're not in the mood to continue arguing with you. Nanyu Xing's face turned ugly. That man's words were extremely unpleasant, but he didn't expect this woman to be the same. She had a sharp tongue and didn't know what was good for her. He clenched his fists and his voice was even colder. You're going in too? The god-slaying tomb is extremely dangerous. Why are you going there for no reason? He had thought that they had specially come to this deserted place to refine Emperor Divine weapons, but now it seemed that it wasn't the case. Chu Lue almost laughed out loud. Are the Red Soul Forest and the god-slaying tomb your territory? Only you can enter and others can't? Isn't this too unreasonable? Nanyu Xing was speechless. He was indeed in no position to stop the fun here. But Nanyi suddenly crossed her arms and sneered. Of course it's because there's something wrong with you. We were about to pass through the Red Soul Forest and enter the god-slaying tomb, but you followed us. The god-slaying tomb is vast and there are countless places to enter. Why did we meet you here? Isn't this too much of a coincidence? As long as she wasn't fighting with Rong Xiu, her combat strength wasn't weak. Moreover, she had already regarded Chu Luiyue as her enemy in her heart. When they spoke, it was naturally tit for tat. Oh, so that's how it is. It does sound reasonable. Chu Luiyue nodded as if she agreed with him and changed the topic. But it seems that we were here first. If there's a problem, it should be you, right? Nanny was stunned. You, she wanted to say something, but suddenly remembered that the other party seemed to have been here before they came. It didn't feel good to be in the wrong when they were in the right. Nanyu Xing also frowned. So, it was really just a coincidence? Even so, we have to go in from here now. Go somewhere else and don't go with us. His tone was very hard, as if he was ordering someone. Chu Liwei felt that it was even more interesting. These two siblings seemed to have a screw loose in their heads. She didn't know if it was because they had been in a superior position for a long time and were used to ordering people around, but every word they said could successfully disgust her. Do you usually control the world like this? Chu Liwei couldn't suppress the curiosity in her heart and asked sincerely. Nanyu Xing and the others were embarrassed. So, you don't want to do as I say? Nanyu Xing's voice seemed to carry a hint of threat. Chu Liwei smiled and her eyes curved. She stretched out her hand and pointed at Nanyi, saying very sincerely. Speaking of pestering, isn't it your precious sister who has been pestering my husband? I think the ones who should take the initiative to leave are you, right? Mobile users, please browse and read. A better reading experience comes from Love Network. Chapter 1634. Tuanzi buried its head in her shoulder and rubbed against her. Then it reluctantly let go of her hand. Then you will miss me every day. Chu Luiyue kissed her face. Dumpling jumped down from her arms, snorted at Yu Qian and turned to leave. Yu Qian looked at Wan Jianfeng. Go and arrange her residence. Yes. In fact, this matter should have been handled by Jin Yunlai. But because of Mu Yafeng's matter, almost all of his authority had been taken away. Even such a matter was handed over to the fifth divine emissary. Chu Luiyue watched Dumpling leave. Yu Qian was obviously worried about her. He had been following behind her as if he wanted to personally send her back to Fengming Mountain. Chu Luiyue raised her eyes slightly. The light barrier between the illusory god palace and Fengming Mountain fell from the sky, flickering with a faint glow. She had always thought that this barrier couldn't be passed, but now it seemed that it didn't cause any obstruction to Dumpling. This was much more convenient. Shangguanyu, come with me. She put away her thoughts and smiled at Wan Jianfeng. Sorry to trouble you, fifth divine emissary. Wan Jianfeng didn't say anything and walked in a certain direction. Chu Luiyue immediately followed. When he passed by Jin Yunlai, he suddenly said, Wait. Chu Luiyue stopped in her tracks and turned to look at him. Seventh divine emissary? I have a question for you. Jin Yunlai said, staring at her eyes as if trying to see something from them. The last Xian formation wasn't included in the mythical flame diagram. How did you crack it? This last Xian formation was undoubtedly the most difficult one on the entire star path. Even he had spent a lot of time and energy to barely crack it back then. Even after that, he had spent several years and tried countless times before he finally managed to successfully unleash it. But what about Tu Liwei? She had only been in the illusory god palace for a few months. From the heaven gate to the illusory god palace, she had deciphered the countless profound formations on this star road one by one. Even though she had seen some of them before, such efficiency was simply too shocking. Or even illusory. Jin Yunlai asked himself. Even now he might not be able to cast the last Xian formation as quickly and smoothly as her. Chu Liyue looked at him with clear eyes and a sincere expression. Is that very difficult? Jin Yunlai choked. For a moment he felt that Chu Liyue was mocking him. But in the next moment Chu Liyue laughed. That profound formation indeed did not appear on the mythical flame diagram because there was no need for it to be included. That Xian formation looked complicated, but in fact, it was just a collection of the Xian formations from before on the Star Road. Since the previous ones could be broken, how difficult would the last one be? Jin Yunlai's heart skipped a beat and his entire body froze on the spot. Chu Liyue's lips curved slightly. Without another word, she turned and followed Wan Jianfeng. Patriarch Nan, let's meet another day. The flesh on Nan Jinshu's face trembled violently. At this moment, Chu Liyue suddenly felt someone's gaze on her. She paused in her steps and looked up. In the distance, in front of the main hall of the illusory god palace, a person was standing with his hands behind his back, looking at her from afar. Jun Jiuqing. When did he come? Most importantly, he seemed to have come from the main hall. However, Jun Jiuqing's expression was different from before. In the past he always had a smile on his lips, but now his face was calm and expressionless. He seemed to be looking at her, but his eyes seemed to be unfocused. In short, it felt a little strange. Su Li followed her line of sight and explained softly. Jun Jiuqing entered the main hall of the illusory god palace some time ago, but no one knows what he went there for. They didn't even know why Jun Jiuqing was qualified to enter the main hall. Chu Liyue nodded and retracted her gaze. It seemed that although Jun Jiuqing and Nan Jinshu both had special privileges, Jun Jiuqing was still better. She just didn't know, where did their special privileges come from? In the dark and cramped cell, Dugu Maobao slowly opened his eyes. In the end, this day had still come. Although that person unilaterally tore the contract and caused the time to be brought forward, she didn't disappoint him. Everything that happened before wasn't wasted. In another cell, Lan Xiao was sitting on the ground with one leg bent and leaning against the wall. The air was filled with the faint smell of blood. He lowered his head to take a look. The wound on his arm was already gradually healing. After all, it was a divine body tempered by the golden Tianlei, so it naturally wouldn't be damaged so easily. His recovery ability after injury was also quite good. Looks like it's really soon. He touched his chin and chuckled softly. This chuckle affected the wound at the corner of his mouth, causing him to hiss in pain. He licked his lips and leaned his head slightly against the wall. Although it was dark all around and almost nothing could be seen, there was still a faint glow in his eyes. Chu Liyue and Su Li followed Wan Jianfeng all the way. Along the way, Su Li would explain to her in a low voice from time to time. She had been here for quite some time and was quite familiar with it. Chu Liyue listened as she walked. Suddenly, she stopped and looked in a certain direction. Where is that? Su Li followed her line of sight. That's the residence of the seventh oracle. Chu Liyue shook her head. No, I'm talking about the courtyard at the back. Su Li was stunned. Wan Jianfeng suddenly turned around and looked at her. How do you know there's another courtyard there? Chapter 1635. She had too many advantages, like a dazzling pearl. He only wanted to hold her in his hands and monopolize her. Of course, he knew that this was just wishful thinking, because she deserved a wider world and a more prosperous scenery. Then he could only choose one and say it more obviously. As long as she stood here, she had already won. Why should he waste any more effort? Chu Liyue's eyes flickered when she heard that. She had to admit that when this man said such words, it was always easier to move her heart. Cough. Shangguan Jing, who had been ignored and never paid attention to, coughed hard. He began to feel that it was a mistake for him to follow them. It was clear that the two of them didn't do anything. They only looked at each other a few times and talked to each other. Today's waist hug was the most intimate action between the two of them during this period of time. It could be said that he had restrained himself to the extreme. However, Shangguan Jing still felt that he was very, very redundant. What a miscalculation. Rong Xiu and Chu Liyue looked over at the same time. At the same time, Rong Xiu's fingertips gently rubbed her back twice. Then he tactfully retracted his hand. Chu Liyue, she gave Rong Xiu a warning look. Control yourself. Rong Xiu raised his eyebrows. Am I not restrained enough? Chu Luyue, Shangguanjing looked up at the sky. Cough, I think it's about time. Can we prepare to enter the Scarlet Soul Forest? The weather was clear and there were no clouds in the sky. The Scarlet Soul Forest, which looked especially eerie in the darkness last night, looked much more normal now. Black trees stood tall. Occasionally, thick roots would be revealed and they were also completely black. The red leaves swayed in the wind, like a scene at the end of autumn that was about to wither. However, the strange thing was that there were no leaves on the ground in the forest. Not a single one. In a normal forest there would be a thick layer of fallen leaves, but here it was flat and clean. Looking at it like this, it was inevitable that one would find it strange. Let's go. After Shangguanjing finished speaking, he took the lead and entered. Chu Luyue glanced at the swaying red leaves. He narrowed his eyes and walked in. Shangguanjing took the lead, followed by Chu Luyue. Rong Xiu was one step behind her and was at the end of the line. The soil on the ground was reddish-brown and very soft. Stepping on it would not make any sound. The forest was very quiet. Other than the rustling of the leaves in the wind, there was no other sound. They could even hear each other's breathing. In the Scarlet Soul Forest, one cannot use origin power, nor can one fly. One can only walk forward step by step. As Shangguanjing walked, he patiently explained some things to pay attention to. Although it's a lot slower, it's safer. To walk through the Scarlet Soul Forest, it would take about 4 hours. We should be able to leave this place before the poison gas spreads again. Chu Luyue listened from the back and responded obediently. Then he couldn't help but ask, Taizu, you've been to the god-slaying tomb before. Why, have I never heard you mention it? The point was that he seemed to know this place better than others. What had he experienced here in the past? Taizu pondered for a while before he spoke again. In fact, there's nothing I can't say. It's just that the last time I came here I didn't have a good memory, so I didn't mention it to you. No one was willing to take the initiative to recall and mention those unhappy memories. This time, if Chu Luyue had not been forced here by the other party, he would not have mentioned it. Chu Luyue frowned slightly. She had never seen Taizu like this. Chibi. What happened here really made it hard for him to let go. Taizu, if you don't want to say it, actually, Shangguanjing waved his hand and suddenly laughed. It's nothing. It's been so many years. He paused for a while before he continued. That year, before I went to the northern region of Untainted Land, the last place I stayed was the god-slaying tomb. Chu Luyue was a bit shocked. Didn't this mean that Taizu went to the northern region of Untainted Land from here? But these two places were famous for being dangerous in the world of divine ruins. Why did he? When I came to the world of divine ruins, I didn't belong to any sect, but I was arrogant. After I defeated 7 weapon refining supremacies, I became even more famous and attracted many people to follow me, but also caused a lot of hatred. Since I had already established the heavenly order, I naturally didn't want to establish a sect here. I wanted to be alone, so I rejected all the followers. But I met a friend and we had a good chat. He wasn't a weapon refining master, just an ordinary martial artist with average talent. He stayed at the high god level for many years and still couldn't break through. But he was open-minded and I admired him. I heard that he was also a person outside the world of divine ruins and came here alone, so I appreciated him and treated him as a close friend. Later, he heard that there was a supreme treasure in the god-slaying tomb that could help him break through to the god level, so he was a bit eager to try. I heard that this place was dangerous, so I decided to come with him. If I could help him break through to the god level, I would be able to get rid of a knot in his heart. Hearing this, Chu Luyue had already guessed something. Sure enough, Taizu heaved a long sigh. Unfortunately, I treated him like a close friend, but he was just using me. After we came here, we went through a lot of difficulties and finally found that thing. But whoosh. Suddenly, a gust of wind blew. In the Crimson Soul Forest, a mournful whimper sounded from afar. Digression. See you tomorrow. Mobile users, please browse for a better reading experience from Love Network. Chapter 1636. Chu Luyue's heart tightened. He looked up at the forest but found that the sound seemed to be coming from all directions, and he couldn't tell where it was coming from. Shangguanjing frowned and said, "Don't worry. Those are just vengeful spirits in the Scarlet Soul Forest. Vengeful spirits? That's right. The so-called vengeful spirits are the souls of those cultivators who wanted to pass through the Scarlet Soul Forest and enter the god-slaying tomb. Because they were trapped here, they are full of resentment and resentment. However, these souls don't have their own will and consciousness. As long as we don't use force, we won't be discovered by them and can pass through safely. Chu Liyue nodded thoughtfully. I see. The whimpering sound was mournful and miserable, as if it was right beside them. When the sound clearly fell into their ears, they couldn't help but feel a chill in their hearts. It wasn't hard to imagine how miserable and pitiful these people were when they died in the Scarlet Soul Forest. Fortunately, the three of them were mentally strong and weren't disturbed by the whimpering sound. They continued forward. However, after being disturbed by the sound, Shengguanjing didn't continue speaking. Chu Liyue didn't ask any more questions. Taizu had always been free and easy. Chu Liyue could see that the incident back then had a deep impact on him. So much so that today, 1,000 years later, he still didn't want to mention it. He probably hadn't completely let it go. In fact, it was understandable if he thought about it carefully. At that time, Taizu was alone in the Divine Ruins world and only regarded this person as a friend. It was almost a trust that he could entrust his life to. However, the other party betrayed him for a treasure. No matter who it was, they wouldn't feel good about such a thing. However, Chu Liyue still had a small question in his heart. At that time, Taizu was already a venerable artificer. This status was much higher than that of the venerable god and the doctor of the same level. Then why did that person choose to betray Taizu and kill Taizu just for a treasure that could help a cultivator break through from the high god to the venerable god? On one hand, Taizu had no interest in this thing. On the other hand, even if he obtained the treasure and successfully became a god, he would still be slightly inferior to Taizu. Why did he have to be so decisive? However, since Taizu did not continue, Chu Liyue did not ask further. For Taizu, every time he mentioned it, it was a process of tearing open the scars of his wounds. She pursed her lips and lowered her eyes. Suppressing the doubts and emotions in her heart, she continued to move forward with Taizu. There were a few times when Chu Liyue's ears hurt from the sobbing. She even felt that someone was standing beside her, ready to kill her at any time. But in the end she controlled herself and ignored it, burying her head in the front. After walking for an unknown period of time, the mournful and shrill sobbing sound finally subsided. Chu Liyue heaved a sigh of relief. The sound was endless and did not dissipate for a long time. No one knew how many people had died here, and no one knew how many skeletons were buried under this seemingly flat and clean ground. A gust of wind blew and the leaves rustled. Chu Liyue looked up. On the black trees, countless red leaves swayed in the wind. As she got closer, she could clearly see the veins on one of the leaves. They were not the veins of a normal leaf, but the shape of a human bone. A gust of cold air surged up from the soles of her feet. Chu Liyue calmly withdrew her gaze, but the scene of the leaves swaying in the wind like bloody palms last night appeared in her mind. So, the Red Soul Forest was not even within the range of the god-slaying mound, but it was already so terrifying and dangerous. What kind of danger awaited them when they entered the god-slaying mound? We're almost out of here. At this moment, Taizu's words interrupted Chu Liyue's thoughts. She looked up in the direction of the voice and found that the edge of the forest was faintly visible. In about half an hour they should be able to get out. Chu Liyue did not dare to let down her guard. He followed Taizu even more cautiously. As long as they could, a sharp scream suddenly broke the silence in the forest. Chu Liyue's heart skipped a beat. This was not the voice of a vengeful spirit, but of a human. And it sounded familiar. Chu Liyue and the rest turned their heads and looked in the direction of the voice. Then they saw a few familiar figures. It was Nan Yuxing and the rest. They seemed to have encountered some danger and were running towards them quickly. As they ran, they would turn their heads from time to time, as if they were afraid that something would catch up with them. Taizu could not help but curse. At this time they were about to successfully leave this place, but trouble came looking for them again. Let's go. Taizu immediately shouted. He grabbed Chu Liyue's wrist and quickly headed out of the forest. Rongxiu also quickly caught up and followed behind the two of them. Wait, you guys. Nan Yuxing and the rest were originally in a terrible state. When they suddenly saw the figures in front of them, They did not care about anything else and immediately shouted. "Help us. We will definitely thank you." As the distance between the two parties was not too close and there were trees in the forest, they did not see clearly that Chu Luiyue and the rest were in front of them. Chu Luiyue frowned. Hearing Nan Yuxing's anxious voice and the scream from Nanyi just now, it was not difficult to deduce that they were definitely in trouble now. However, because Taizu's reaction was extremely fast, she did not see the specific situation over there clearly. However, it was precisely because Taizu's reaction was fast and strong that she was even more certain that this was definitely not a good thing. Thinking about how arrogant those people were before they came in. Now that even they were forced to this point, it was obvious that they were in trouble. They were about to get out safely. If they were dragged down by others at this time, Chu Luiyue was not sure if she would have the intention to kill them. However, because they could not use force in the forest, their speed did not increase by much. On the other hand, Nan Yuxing and the rest were already forced into a life-and-death situation. How could they care so much? They only knew how to use their full speed to attack. The distance between the two parties was rapidly shrinking. Chu Luiyue could even hear the strange rustling sound behind her. She could not help but look back. The moment she saw it, her pupils immediately shrank. In the forest, Nan Yuxing and the rest were fleeing in a sorry state. Nanyi looked panicked and her face was full of tears. There was also an additional wound on her left shoulder. Although it had been reluctantly bandaged with gauze, a dark red color still seeped out. The two elders were protecting them from behind, but they did not seem to be in good condition either. And behind them, several scarlet leaves were rapidly approaching. Wherever those leaves passed, they actually tore open black spatial cracks. It was as if they would swallow them up at any time. Mobile users, please browse and read. A better reading experience comes from Love Network. Rong Xiu's eyes narrowed dangerously. In the end, he suppressed his urge and did not make a move. At this moment, Nan Yuxing had already arrived in front of them. His body had been scratched by the leaves and was bleeding profusely. But he didn't care. With a flash of cold light, a long sword suddenly appeared in his hand, and he went straight for Rong Xiu. But just as the sword was about to pierce Rong Xiu, Nan Yuxing suddenly tilted his wrist, changed the direction and attacked Chu Luiyue. He was here for Chu Luiyue. In an instant, Rong Xiu's eyes seemed to be surging with turbulent waves. However, just as he was about to make a move, a reddish-gold light suddenly flashed in front of Chu Luiyue. Nan Yuxing only saw a blur in front of him, and a girl who looked no more than 3 or 4 years old suddenly appeared in front of him. The girl was petite and wore a reddish-gold lotus leaf dress. Her 2 white little feet were bare, and her hair was tied up in 2 buns with a red string and a golden bell. She was very beautiful and cute. Her large, grape-like eyes made her look even more innocent. Nan Yuxing frowned subconsciously. Why did such a little girl suddenly appear? Could it be the child of these two? But if that was the case, how did they hide this child before? You're so annoying. Before he could figure it out, he heard the little girl in front of him suddenly speak. She fiddled with the bell on her head. Her expression was innocent, but there was also a hint of laziness and indifference. Nan Yuxing was stunned at first, but then a fierce look flashed across his face. Who cares who she is? Since she's with those people, I'll just kill her. He did not stop moving and the sharp blade pierced straight ahead. When the sword fell, it would definitely pierce through the little girl's heart. Dumpling finally stopped fiddling with the bell and looked forward. The tip of the sword was already a fist's distance away from her forehead. Her hair was blown up by the cold wind and the corner of her dress swayed. Nan Yuxing's lips curled into a cold smile. However, in the next moment the expression on his face suddenly froze. Because his sword had suddenly stopped. The other end of the sharp blade was grabbed by a chubby little hand. Nan Yuxing did not react for a moment. This little girl had actually blocked his attack with her bare hands. How was this possible? Although he had not used his full strength, he had definitely used 70 to 80% of it. Such a child, how could... Crack. A crisp breaking sound was heard. Nan Yuxing watched as his sword was forcibly broken by the other party's little hand. In the next moment, before he could react, the little figure in front of him suddenly approached rapidly. So fast. Nan Yuxing was shocked. He did not sense any fluctuation of force from the other party at all. How could she have such a fast movement technique? However, he no longer had time to think about this. Bang! A dull sound was heard. An intense pain quickly spread from his lower abdomen. Dumpling had directly approached and punched Nan Yuxing's body. Nan Yuxing's hand unconsciously loosened, and the sword fell to the ground with a clang. At the same time, his body flew backwards and landed heavily on the ground. Big brother. Eldest young master. Nan Yi and the rest were shocked when they saw this scene. Due to the pain, Nan Yuxing's body was bent into the shape of a shrimp. He felt that several of his ribs were broken and his internal organs were squeezed into a ball. He was in so much pain that he did not know if they had ruptured. His face was pale and he was covered in cold sweat. He almost fainted. In a daze, there was only one thought left in his mind. That little girl, who exactly is she? She actually has such a strong combat ability? Whoosh! A rustling sound could be heard. Nan Yuxing opened his eyes with difficulty, and to his horror, he saw countless red leaves coming towards him. Ah! A shrill scream resounded in the forest. Tuanzi spread out her hands and shrugged helplessly. I already said that you are very annoying. Mobile users, please browse for a better reading experience from Love Network. Chapter 1638. Dumpling was a crimson gold heavenly phoenix, and she had already opened her fourth meridian. Although she looked like a white and tender ball of flesh, in reality her physical strength was extremely strong. She wouldn't care even if 100 swords attacked her at the same time, let alone a single sword. She didn't need to use force. A gentle punch was enough to kill the other party. Nan Yuxing was already injured and he looked down on Dumpling. If he wasn't dealt with, who would be dealt with? Nan Yi and the rest panicked when they saw Nan Yuxing's figure being swallowed by the red leaves. They couldn't care less about the danger and rushed over. They didn't even have the time and energy to get angry. All they could think of was to save Nan Yuxing as soon as possible. If they were too late then, Dumpling, let's go. Chu Luiwei waved at Dumpling. Hey, I'm coming. Dumpling replied happily. She immediately turned around and ran toward Chu Luiwei. Tuanzi originally wanted to throw herself into her arms, but when she caught a glimpse of the corner of her white clothes, she restrained herself. Well done. A cold voice came from above. Dumpling widened her eyes in shock and looked at Zhou Xian in disbelief. His expression was calm, but there was a rare look of admiration in his eyes. Was he praising her? Dumpling blinked, but Zhou Xian had already looked away. Her eyes darted around as she tried to pull Chu Luiwei's sleeves with her small hands. Chu Luiwei grabbed her hand. Tuanzi hurriedly glanced at Zhou Xian and saw him raise his brows, but he did not say anything. Did he agree? Oh. Dumpling was overjoyed. She could finally be together with Ayu openly. She hurriedly grabbed Chu Luiwei's hand tightly and followed her step by step, not forgetting to ask, Ayu, did I perform well just now? Chu Luiwei couldn't help but laugh. After so many years, Dumpling had broken through from the 9-colored heavenly pheasant to her current appearance. Her strength and bloodline had increased tremendously, but her personality was still the same as before. Every time he did something he would always rush over excitedly to claim credit. Chu Luiwei pinched her nose. Well done. A big smile bloomed on Dumpling's face. Hehe. If he had known that the reward this time would be so good, he would have thrown a few more punches just now. If Nan Yuxing knew what Dumpling was thinking, he would probably vomit blood. Just to hold hands with his master and talk to him, he beat him to death? The most important thing was that he could really fight. In this Crimson Soul Forest, all the cultivators didn't dare to use their origin power arbitrarily. Once they did, it was a risk of life and death. However, there was one person who was able to defeat all of them just by relying on his physical strength alone. Was there any justice in this world? Of course, Chu Luiwei and the rest weren't interested in knowing what happened to Nan Yuxing and the rest. After walking for a short distance, the sky finally brightened up. Shangguan Jing finally said, "We're out." Hearing Taizu's voice, Chu Luiwei took a step forward. At this moment she clearly felt that everything around her seemed to have changed subtly. Without the cover of the forest, the sunlight poured down without restraint. Chu Luiwei squinted slightly. After getting used to the light, she looked ahead. In the wilderness, as far as the eye could see, Countless broken tombstones were scattered everywhere. They had entered the Crimson Soul Forest since noon and took about 4 hours to come out. It was still afternoon when the sun was still shining. However, at a glance, the scene in front of them sent chills down their spines. So this is the Godslayer tomb, Chu Liwei muttered softly. The Godslayer tomb was indeed a graveyard. There seemed to be an invisible barrier in the sky. The warm and bright sunlight was blocked outside. No matter how good the weather was, it was still cold and bleak here. A gloomy aura was looming. This is only the edge of the Godslayer tomb. Those who died here were all exalted gods. Shengguanjing explained. Chu Liwei held her breath slightly. At a glance, there were at least hundreds of tombstones here. And these were all exalted gods. More importantly, with their strength they could only be at the edge of the Godslayer tomb. Then what was deeper inside? After passing through here and entering the center of the Godslayer tomb, you will find the tombs of exalted gods. Shengguanjing's voice was very calm. But in Chu Liuyue's ears, every word was like thunder. The tombs of exalted gods? How many had died to be called a tomb? She only knew that the Godslayer tomb was a dangerous place where many exalted gods were buried, but she didn't know the truth was so horrifying. One had to know that in the entire Lingxiao Academy, the number of supreme gods that were still alive did not exceed the number of fingers on one hand. But there were so many buried here. Tens of thousands of years ago, a bloody battle broke out here. It was said that the battle lasted for 81 days. Countless top exalted gods died in the battle and were buried here in the end. That's how the Godslayer tomb came to be. Shengguanjing seemed to have seen Chu Liuyue's confusion and explained patiently. It was said that at that time the Divine Ruins world was full of force. Exalted gods were not numerous, but there were many of them. That's why so many peerless exalted gods were implicated in that bloody battle, and they all died here together. That's why the battle was so fierce. Almost all the exalted gods and souls were destroyed. Even their treasures and cultivation arts were all destroyed. That's why the Godslayer tomb has become a notorious place of evil over the years. Shengguanjing sighed as if he found it a pity. Because of that battle, countless inheritances were broken. Chu Liwei frowned and couldn't help but ask, then why did such a fierce battle break out at that time? It sounded like it wasn't a conflict between a few forces, but many people were involved. Shengguanjing pondered for a moment. It's been tens of thousands of years. How do the descendants know? It's just that, when I came here that year I accidentally found some clues. They seemed to be fighting over a book. Chu Liwei was stunned. The book? What kind of book? Mobile users, please browse and read. A better reading experience comes from the Love Network. Chapter 1639. I don't know about that. Shengguanjing shook his head. The battle back then was full of mysteries to the later generations. It was already extremely rare to be able to inadvertently find a clue. As for the rest, it was even more difficult for him to find out more. Chu Liwei thought about it and agreed. Everyone in the world didn't know about it, let alone Taizu, an outsider. Moreover, he came here back then to accompany that friend of his to find something. It was an accident that he knew about this. Since most of those people's treasures were destroyed, then what was left should be extraordinary, right? Chu Liwei finally couldn't help but ask. Taizu, is the thing you were looking for really just to help a high god expert break through to the venerable god realm? Taizu was stunned, then frowned. He had never thought about this. Every time he thought of the god-slaying mound, he would recall the pain of being betrayed. That was why he had tried his best not to think about it all these years. There were many things that had happened during that time that he had not thought about in detail. However, after hearing Chu Liuyue's words, he realized that something was indeed wrong. In the Divine Ruins world, there were countless cultivators who were trapped in the high god realm for their entire lives and could not advance further. Because at this stage of cultivation, it was already time to rely on talent. No matter how diligent one was, without talent and comprehension, one would not be able to successfully break through. Therefore, when he heard that there was such a treasure back then, he did not hesitate to follow that person. At that time he only thought that that person wanted it and he had never doubted it. But now that he thought about it, there was indeed something wrong everywhere. He didn't need that thing and he wouldn't fight with that person. Why did that person want to kill him? One had to know that if he died, that person would lose a top-notch weapon refining venerable. This could only prove that the value of that thing in that person's eyes was higher than that of a weapon refining venerable. And such an item was rare in the world. Jing suddenly felt that his memories of the past seemed to be covered by a layer of gauze, and they became unclear. The truth that he believed back then, perhaps, there was something else going on? Jing's heart beat violently. He closed his eyes, took a deep breath and calmed his emotions. Perhaps, he paused for a moment but didn't continue. Dad, he changed the topic. Forget it, let's talk about this later. He looked at Chu Liyue. That person told you to come to the god-slaying mound, but did he specify the meeting place? Chu Liyue looked into the distance. He didn't say it explicitly, but I should be able to reach it with the guidance of the sea buckthorn wooden token. The other party had put in so much effort to lure her here, so there was no way he would refuse to see her. Tomorrow is the day we meet. Chu Liyue pondered for a moment. Perhaps he will only appear tomorrow. Jing thought about it and felt that it made sense. Then should we wait here or, let's go inside and take a look. Chu Liyue stared straight ahead, slowly clenching his fists in his sleeves. She had a premonition. The other party definitely had a motive for inviting her here. And what is it? They officially entered the god-slaying mound. Broken tombstones were scattered everywhere and there were no bones to be seen. Tens of thousands of years of wind, frost and snow had already sharpened everything. Chu Liyue walked through, glancing at the tombstones. She could see that there used to be words carved on them, but now those words had been eroded by time and became blurred. Most of them only had faint traces left. After walking for a while, Chu Liyue felt that the heat on her body had been swallowed up silently. The surrounding cold air silently engulfed her. Without these tombstones, no one would know that under this vast and desolate land, there were countless skeletons of strong masters of the supreme gods. Their moods seemed to have been affected by the atmosphere. They walked forward quietly. Even Dumpling, who had always been cheerful and noisy, noticed something at this time. She grabbed Chu Liyue's hand, pursed her lips and followed without saying a word. After walking for a while, Chu Liyue frowned more and more. He pondered for a long time and finally spoke. Taizu, do you know who set up these tombstones? If it was a descendant, why were these tombstones broken? Taizu paused and his voice was much lower. They should have been set up by the strong masters who participated in the war back then. Chu Liyue's heart skipped a beat. They had set up tombstones without even fighting. This was the determination to die. No wonder the war back then was so tragic. So many strong masters of the supreme gods had been killed in their souls. What kind of book could cause them to act like this? Chu Liyue could not figure it out. Perhaps only those people back then knew the answer. Crack. Something bumped against her foot. Chu Liyue looked down and saw a fist-sized rock that seemed to have rolled over from the side. Chu Liyue was deep in thought just now, so she didn't notice it. However, this rock was very ordinary and it didn't hurt when it hit her foot. Moreover, it stopped there. Chu Liyue didn't take it to heart. She continued walking forward. Not long after, another rock rolled over. This time Chu Liyue saw it in advance. She raised her eyebrows slightly, because this rock was also coming for her. She didn't move. She only took a step to the side when the rock was about to rush over. The rock rolled past her previous position, but it quickly stopped. Chu Liyue narrowed her eyes. She could clearly see that this rock wasn't obstructed at all. It stopped on its own. What's wrong? Jing sensed that something was wrong with her and turned to ask. Chu Liyue didn't say anything and looked around. Although there were many broken tombstones scattered here, it was flat and spacious. Why was there a rock rolling towards her out of nowhere? And there was more than one. Just as this thought flashed through her mind, Chu Liyue heard a soft sound behind her. He turned to look. As expected, another rock was heading straight for her. Digression. When I woke up in the morning, I realized that my lousy laptop had automatically deleted my writing software. Fortunately, I installed it in my new laptop before. After tossing and turning for a while, it was 12:30 p.m. Mobile users, please browse and read. A better reading experience from Love Network. Chapter 1640. Then a second piece and a third piece. The surrounding stones seemed to be guided by some kind of power. They all became restless and moved toward Tu Liwei. This is... Shang Guanjing was also stunned. He had never encountered such a situation when he came here before. More importantly, this movement was obviously coming for Tu Liwei. What was going on? Rong Xiu frowned slightly and held Tu Liwei's hand. We have to leave as soon as possible. These stones are all from the broken tombstones of the supreme gods. Being chased by broken tombstones was already uncomfortable enough. Moreover, these were all supreme gods' tombstones? Not to mention that these stones might contain a certain amount of power. No one could be sure about that. Therefore, Rong Xiu made a prompt decision to leave with Tu Liwei immediately. Tu Liwei's eyes met with his and she lightly nodded. Tu Liwei and the others began to speed up and move toward the center of the god-slaying mound. Behind them, more and more stones rolled toward them. It would be fine if there were only a few. However, as time passed, the stones had almost gathered into a river and were rushing toward Tu Liwei. This scene was too strange. However, what made Tu Liwei feel strange was that she did not sense any killing intent from these stones. They seemed to be controlled by something and kept gathering toward her. However, specifically, it seemed that they did not intend to do anything. Of course, Tu Liwei did not dare to let her guard down. She could only rely on her feelings to determine whether there was danger. After all, this was the god-slaying mound. Fortunately, Taizu had been here before and was experienced, so he could quickly find a safe way forward. Along the way they were scared but not in danger. However, after walking for a long time, the surrounding scenery did not change at all. Taizu had said before that as long as they entered the tombstones of the supreme gods, these strange stones would definitely stop. But after such a long time it still seemed so far away. Tu Liwei could not help but ask, Taizu, when can we get out of here? Shang Guanjing glanced at the sky and said uncertainly, that's right. About 4 to 6 hours left. In fact, he was still understating it. Back then he had walked here for 3 days and 3 nights. Even though it was his first time here and he didn't know where to go, it was enough to prove that this place was vast and he couldn't leave so quickly. Tu Liu's heart sank. She knew Taizu too well. This meant that they might stay here for a longer period of time. Now that they were moving at full speed, those behind them still couldn't catch up. There was always a certain distance between them. However, their strength was constantly being depleted while the rocks were constantly converging. As their numbers increased, Tu Liwei noticed that their aura and energy were much stronger than before. No one could guarantee that they would be able to walk out safely. Tu Liwei felt a headache coming on. Could it be that there's something special on me that's causing this commotion? But it doesn't seem like anything. Wasn't everything fine in the past? Why is it so strange here? The key was that all cultivators could not fly here. This made their situation even more difficult. At this moment, a rock suddenly rolled to the bottom of Tu Liu's feet. Her heart skipped a beat. Her body fell to the side uncontrollably. Rong Xiu was standing beside her. When he saw this, he immediately hugged her slender waist and pulled her into his arms. Tu Liwei felt that she had fallen into a broad and firm chest. A cold fragrance instantly enveloped her. Just as she helped Rong Xiu stand up, she heard Taizu's exclamation behind her. Tu Liwei knew that something was wrong. She immediately turned around and saw that Taizu seemed to have slipped on the rocks and was falling backward. Most importantly, when the great ancestor fell halfway, the void behind him suddenly rippled with a few waves. Half of Taizu's body was then swallowed by the void. Taizu. Before Tu Liwei could finish her sentence, Taizu's figure had completely disappeared. Just like that, he disappeared before their eyes without making a sound. Tu Liu's eyes widened. She was about to go forward when Rong Xiu hugged her tightly. That's the void turbulence. Then Tu Liwei saw that the moment they rolled to the edge of the fluctuating void they turned into dust. Her heart suddenly trembled. Senior Shangguan is a venerable god expert. He can definitely protect himself. Rong Xiu said in a low voice. She was still a venerable god, so she naturally could not go over. Tu Liwei gritted her teeth. Rong Xiu was right. Taizu was powerful and had been here before. Nothing should happen to him. What she needed to do now was to protect herself. Gradually the ripples calmed down. Everything seemed to have returned to normal as if nothing had happened. Tu Liwei had just opened her mouth when she suddenly felt a strong suction force beside her. She quickly turned her head and saw that the rocks had unknowingly formed some strange pattern on the ground. And that powerful force was erupting from the center of it. It was as if it was going to swallow her. The wind howled. Chu Liyue's hair danced wildly. Rong Xiu hugged her tightly and pressed her head against his chest. Hold me tight. Chu Liyue instinctively hugged his lean waist even more tightly. Rong Xiu looked up. Two extremely intense colors, one gold and one black, suddenly appeared in his eyes. Mobile users, please browse for a better reading experience from Love Network. Chapter 1641. An incomparably powerful aura suddenly erupted from Rong Xiu's body. The next moment black and gold flames suddenly appeared in the void in front of him. They intertwined and condensed into a long whip, which was violently lashed out in front of him. Smack! The crisp sound of the whip breaking through the air was heard. On the ground, the formation formed by the stones was suddenly destroyed by this terrifying power. Bam bam bam. The sound of stones exploding could be heard. Countless stones were instantly reduced to dust. As for that strange power, it was instantly torn apart. Boom. The two forces collided, and the violent aftermath began to spread wildly in all directions. Chu Liyue only felt that the surrounding space seemed to be crushed by some kind of force, which was almost suffocating. She subconsciously wanted to look up, but she felt a broad and strong hand gently and firmly pressed her back into his arms. The next moment, the suffocating feeling quickly disappeared as if it had never appeared. It's just a small problem. Rong Xiu's voice was exceptionally deep. Chu Liyue was tightly held in his arms. When he spoke, she could clearly feel his chest vibrating. Warm and firm. It was as if as long as he was there, he could shelter her from all the wind and rain. Chu Liyue nodded slightly. At this moment, the ground in the middle of the formation of stones suddenly began to collapse. Crack. A crack rapidly spread toward the two of them. Immediately, Chu Liyue felt that there was nothing under her feet. The bodies of the two suddenly fell downwards. Darkness filled their vision and they could not see anything. Chu Liyue could only hear the whistling of the wind in her ears, as well as Rong Xiu's heartbeat and breathing. Chu Liyue wanted to speak, but she found that the pressure around her was so strong that she could not speak. She could not help but be shocked. Now that she was a high god expert, her combat strength was much stronger than cultivators of the same level. To be able to suppress her to this extent, one could imagine how shocking the power here was. Suddenly, a faint golden light appeared and enveloped the two of them. The terrifying pressure around them suddenly lessened. After some time, the two of them finally landed. With both feet on the ground, Chu Liyue heaved a sigh of relief. She lifted her head from Rong Xiu's arms and looked around. Other than the barrier set up by Rong Xiu, she still could not see anything. What is this place? Chu Liyue frowned and could not help but mutter softly. What she saw was clearly pitch black, but there seemed to be some faint light flickering. However, the light disappeared very quickly and the light was very dim. This made Chu Liyue wonder if she was hallucinating. That's the light produced when the divine domains collide with each other. Rong Xiu explained. Chu Liyue widened her eyes in shock. Those, all of them. If what Rong Xiu said was true, didn't that mean that there were at least 4 or 5 god areas existing together? That's not right. Chu Liyue frowned. Why is there a god area here? If she guessed correctly, they had fallen into the ground. However, whether it was underground or above ground, this area was undoubtedly the tombs of the exalted gods. Taizu once said that almost all the cultivators who participated in the war back then had died, and their souls were destroyed. If that was the case, how could there still be a god area left here? Rong Xiu looked around. The thick black and gold in his eyes had already disappeared silently, so Chu Liyue did not see it. He raised his hand and took out a fist-sized pearl. The surroundings were much brighter. However, the two of them did not see much other than the black ground under their feet. The surrounding space was so dark that it seemed like it could not be dissolved. Although the pearl's light could disperse a part of the darkness, it could only illuminate an area of 10 steps. Further away, it was still dark, as if the light had been swallowed up. Rong Xiu narrowed his eyes and retracted the barrier around the two of them. The pressure here was much lighter than above. Even without the barrier protecting them, it would not affect the two of them too much. At this moment Chu Liyue could feel the surging power around her more clearly. In the darkness, it was very obvious that several forces were silently fighting with each other. Chu Liyue was very familiar with this feeling. She held her breath and raised her wrist slightly. Countless silver-red light spots suddenly appeared in her palm and surrounded her in the blink of an eye. Soon, a stream of light flashed around her and disappeared in the blink of an eye. However, this time Chu Liyue saw it clearly. It was indeed a god area beside her. After it intertwined with her own god area, it produced energy waves. However, the power of the god area was weak. It retreated after light touch. Moreover, it was also because of this that Chu Liyue did not notice the existence of this god area earlier. Chu Liyue retracted her god area. She frowned and fell into deep thought. It was impossible for a god area to exist independently of a cultivator. Even though she had experienced life and death, her soul had never truly perished. Therefore, the god area in Mount Pingmin could be safely preserved until now. However, this was the god-slain tomb. The tombstones outside were enough to explain the problem. Could it be that there were still a small number of people who left their souls in the battle back then? Chu Liyue murmured, full of uncertainty. At this moment, a stone suddenly rolled to Chu Liyue's feet. Chu Liyue looked down and a string in her mind instantly tightened. Where did this stone come from? Why did it seem to be pestering her? Just as Chu Liyue was about to take action, Xiu pulled her back. Wait. Chu Liyue looked at him in confusion. Xiu raised his chin. Chu Liyue followed his gaze and immediately held her breath. She saw a stream of light suddenly appear in the darkness in front of them. This stream of light did not disappear as quickly as the previous ones. Instead, it seemed to be constantly approaching them. This was, a god area was coming towards them? Just as this doubt flashed through Chu Liyue's mind, the god area had already approached them. At this moment, with the help of the light of the pearl, Chu Liyue finally saw that the god area was light blue. The color was very faint, as if it would dissipate with the wind at any time. Chu Liyue's body tensed up. This god area splash. Before she could think clearly, she saw the god area suddenly pouring down like a waterfall. All of it poured into the stone at Chu Liyue's feet. Mobile users, please browse and read. A better reading experience comes from Love Network. Chapter 1642. In less than half an incense's time, the god territory had completely poured into the stone. When the last touch of blue dissipated, the surroundings quickly returned to normal. It was as if nothing had happened. Chu Liyue was stunned. Now, what happened? Xiu had already bent down and picked up the stone. He held it in his hand and looked at it. His eyebrows raised slightly, showing some interest. I see. What's wrong? As Chu Liyue asked, he curiously moved closer. Xiu handed the stone over. Chu Liyue looked around carefully. The stone was the size of a fist and was extremely irregular. It seemed to have come from the broken tombstones. It was grayish-white and did not look much different from ordinary stones. Suddenly, Chu Liyue's eyes focused. He saw a blue mark the size of a fingernail on the stone. This blue mark looked like it had just been painted with paint. It was very clear. It was not difficult to figure out that this was the mark left behind after the god territory poured in. However, at this time when he held the stone in his hand, he could not feel the existence of the god territory. It was no different from an ordinary stone. If he did not see it with his own eyes, Chu Liyue would find it hard to believe that a god territory would automatically pour into a stone. Take a closer look at that blue mark. Xiu reminded him. Chu Liyue moved closer. Suddenly he was stunned. He raised his eyes and looked at Xiu. This is a totem? Chu Liyue said the last two words very softly. Because the blue mark was only the size of a fingernail. At first glance it was a whole piece. Only when he looked closely could he see the complicated intertwining lines on it. Xiu nodded. It seems that this god territory originally belonged to the owner of this broken tombstone. Otherwise, the realm of the gods would not randomly enter a rock like this. Chu Liyue thought about it and felt that Xiu's words were highly likely to be true. However, the owner of this tombstone should have died a long time ago. Why hasn't this deity domain dissipated? And buried in such a place? Chu Liyue said and looked around again. Thinking back to the scene just now, an absurd idea suddenly emerged in her mind. Wait, don't tell me, these god territories all. Before she could finish her sentence, Chu Luiyue felt something hit her foot again. Chu Luiyue didn't even need to see it with his own eyes to know that it was definitely another piece of rock. Her neck was slightly stiff as she lowered her head to take a look. True enough. The shape was different, but it was indeed a stone. There was a faint sound in his ears as if something was approaching. Chu Luiyue looked back and saw a god domain with a faint blue glow slowly drifting over. When he arrived before the two of them, the same thing happened once more. Whoosh! The blue god domain was injected into the second stone and left a small totem on it. Because the mark was too small, Chu Luiyue couldn't tell if the two totems were the same. But now this was not what she was most concerned about. Instead, where was this place and how could she explain everything that had happened? These stones fell down with us just now. Xiu pondered for a moment and looked at Chu Luiyue thoughtfully. It seems that they suddenly attacked just now to pull you down. Pull me down? Chu Luiyue reached out and pointed at her nose, her eyes full of surprise. But why is that? This was her first time in the god-slaying tomb and she had been following the rules on the way. She didn't seem to have done anything wrong, did she? Why did these stones inexplicably entangle her? There seemed to be a flash of dark light in Xiu's eyes, but it disappeared in an instant. He looked at the thick black beside him. After pondering for a moment he said, maybe, there's something on you that they want. Chu Luiyue couldn't figure it out. Could it be that she could become some kind of delicious cake here? If that's the case, doesn't it mean that these god domains and these stones have a certain level of will? And these two things could only carry the will of their owners. Are those people still alive back then? Chu Luiyue couldn't help but murmur in a low voice. Oh, they are dead. Xiu said calmly. Chu Luiyue was stunned and looked at him suspiciously. How do you know? Xiu paused. Because these god domains are ownerless. Ownerless. Normally, when the owner's soul is destroyed, his god domain won't survive. But it's different here. In the battle of the god-slaying mound, countless experts died, and the power that erupted destroyed this place. For tens of thousands of years, nothing grew here. The monstrous evil spirit intertwined with countless broken souls, causing the force of heaven and earth here to be modeled. All the forces gathered and formed a strange state. Those cultivators are dead, but their fighting spirit from back then has been preserved through some sort of method. It is stored in their tombstones and divine domains. All in all, although the cultivators are dead, their fighting spirit still exists. After Xiu finished speaking, Chu Luiyue fell into deep shock and silence. What kind of earth-shattering battle could cause the fighting spirit to still exist after tens of thousands of years? And what kind of obsession was it that even after the death of the body and the destruction of the soul, it still remained in the world and did not dissipate for a long time? Fighting spirit. Chu Luiyue unconsciously clenched the stone in her hand and frowned slightly. Xiu, how do you know these things? Mobile users, please browse for a better reading experience from Love Network. Chapter 1643. As soon as she finished speaking, the surroundings suddenly fell silent for a moment. Xiu looked at her, and there seemed to be waves of light in his deep eyes. His thin lips curled slightly as he said calmly, there are quite a lot of books in the Yuntian Tower's collection. Although very little was known about the battle back then, there were still some related rumors that had been recorded and passed down. It was not difficult to find out about these. Chu Luiyue nodded in understanding. That was true. The Yuntian Tower had stood in the divine ruins for tens of thousands of years and had a deep foundation. It was normal for them to have some understanding of this. The great ancestor knew very little about this place. To a large extent it was because he was an outsider. Naturally, he could not be compared to Xiu's background. Moreover, although these divine territories still exist in the world after tens of thousands of years of exhaustion, their power is basically very thin. Otherwise, it would be impossible for so many divine territories to exist at the same time in such a small space. Chu Luiyue heard this and picked up the second stone. She looked at the two stones in her hand carefully and pursed her lips. Xiu's words made sense. When she used the divine territory just now, she did feel that no one was controlling it. Fighting spirit. If that was the case, what existed in this place right now was the fighting spirit. But why were these stones stuck to her for no reason? Chu Liwei could clearly feel that these two stones did not have any ill intentions towards her. On the contrary, it seemed, there was a trace of dependence and intimacy. This feeling was very subtle. Chu Liwei had been in a nervous state earlier, so she did not feel much. However, now that she knew that this was just fighting spirit left behind after the battle back then, her heart relaxed. Only then did she realize that something was wrong. Just as she was thinking about this, the third stone rolled to her feet. Soon, another divine territory poured into it. From the initial shock and surprise, Chu Liwei was basically used to it now. The only thing she wanted to know now was if she played any role in it. Can we still go out? Chu Liwei looked up. Rong Xiu pondered for a moment. When we came down just now, we also triggered spatial turbulence. Even if he went up now, he wouldn't be in the same position as before. Then, let's wait for a while. About 2 hours later, the space turbulence will calm down again. At that time, it would be much more convenient for us to go out. Chu Liwei nodded. For now, this was indeed the best solution. The Rong Xiu took out a few more pearls and quietly suspended them around the two of them. Then he took out a black cloak and spread it on the ground. Have a seat first. During this period of time, they had been hurrying along. Although they had rested a few times in between, Chu Liwei had been moving at full speed in order not to slow them down, which consumed a lot of energy. After entering the Scarlet Soul Forest, they even rushed all the way. It was always good to be able to rest and adjust for a while. Chu Liwei took his hand. You should rest as well. She knew that the Rong Xiu had not rested much during this period of time. They traveled during the day and refined at night. He was the one who consumed more energy. Sensing the soft touch in his palm, the Rong Xiu raised his eyebrows slightly. It seems that Madame loves her husband dearly. Chu Liwei, so after so many years this man's skin had really become thicker and thicker. Just like that, the two of them began a long wait. 2 hours was not a long time, but the surroundings were silent and dark. Other than this small area around them, they could not see anything else. It really made one feel uneasy. Moreover, Chu Liwei was still worried about the safety of Taizu, so this time seemed even more unbearable. After waiting for a while, she simply closed her eyes and planned to enter a state of mind to cultivate. But she soon realized that this idea was impossible to achieve. The surrounding stones were still rolling towards her. Another piece and another piece. In a short while, there was a neat row of them at her feet. Chu Liwei wanted to resist at first, but she gave up in the end. These stones and god realms did not have any ill intentions towards her. They just knocked her lightly and she did not lose anything. Moreover, as the surrounding god realms entered these stones one after another, she could clearly feel that the inexplicable pressure had lessened significantly. Thinking about it, it was because these god realms were piling up and pressing against each other that it was uncomfortable. Since that was the case, so be it. Chu Liwei lowered her gaze to take a look. In any case, more than half of the stones had already piled up around her. When all the spots were filled, it should be over. But reality proved that Chu Liwei was still too naive. When the last space around her was occupied by a stone, she thought that this was the end of it. But in the next moment, she saw that the stones from before suddenly began to retreat from her side and retreat towards the back. At the same time, a new piece of rock appeared out of nowhere and rolled over to him with a chi-chi-chi sound. Like a relay race, the stones took turns to roll to her side. When the god realms poured into them and left a mark, they obediently left for the next batch. Seeing how orderly they were, Chu Liwei, who was used to seeing storms and waves, could not help but widen her eyes. He was in a mess. What did they take her for? She gritted her teeth and moved to the side. The stones rolled along with her. After trying 2 or 3 times, Chu Liwei gave up struggling again. In fact, she had already discovered the problem. These stones had to touch her before they could contain the god realms. It was also because of this that they were so persistent towards her. Chu Liwei touched her chin. Thinking about it, she had been chased by those stones for so long outside. Was it actually just for this purpose? Chu Liwei rubbed the space between her eyebrows. She had finally seen how powerful and strange this Godslayer tomb was. At present, everything that happened here seemed exceptionally strange. She did not know why these stones were so fixated on her. Unable to figure it out, Chu Liwei decided not to think about it and continued to study Xian formations. Ever since she repaired the sky shuttle formation with Debao's help, she had made significant progress in Xian formations. It was a pity that Debao did not see her after that and left directly. She still had some questions that she did not have time to ask. She could only wait until the next time they met to learn from each other. Time passed slowly. Chu Luiwei held her breath and concentrated. She kept trying to draw those Xian formations in her mind. With her current strength, it was impossible for her to draw the sky shuttle formation in her mind. Thus, according to her previous memories, she recalled and studied those scattered profound formations one by one. A low and gentle voice suddenly sounded in her ear. Chu Luiwei opened her eyes. What's wrong? Should we go? Rong Xiu nodded, but he looked like he wanted to say something. It might be a little troublesome. How? Chu Luiwei inadvertently glanced at him and her voice came to an abrupt stop. Mobile users, please browse for a better reading experience from Love Network. Chapter 1644. Stones. Large stones. Stones piled up into mountains. The empty space in front of her had unknowingly been occupied by countless piles of stones. It had almost completely sealed the path. Why are there so many? Chu Luiwei could not hide her shock and blurted out. She had thought that there would only be a few dozen pieces. Rong Xiu raised his chin subtly. Chu Luiwei's heart skipped a beat. Suddenly she thought of something and turned her neck stiffly to look back. Stones. And stones. The stones around the two of them had almost formed a wall. Furthermore, upon closer inspection, those stones were clearly shining with totems. These stones had all been infused with different divine domains. Chu Luiwei sucked in a cold breath. She had only closed her eyes to rest for a while and drew a few Xian formation diagrams. How did the world become like this the moment she opened her eyes? The only consolation was that the last trace of pressure around her had completely dissipated. Standing here, there was basically no difference from standing outside. The corner of Chu Luiwei's eyes twitched. She did not think that those god domains had already been scattered into these stones. She might feel better. Are we still going out? Chu Luiwei looked at Rong Xiu and asked with difficulty. Rong Xiu raised his eyebrows and chuckled. These god domains have already hidden themselves, and the turbulence above has subsided. Naturally, we can go out. As he spoke, he had already held Chu Luiwei's hand. Their fingers were intertwined. Chu Luiwei's heart calmed down and she nodded. That's good. She had a feeling that if she continued to stay here, something would happen. Let's go. Rong Xiu said and was about to bring her up. Wait. Chu Luiwei suddenly called out to him, then turned around and took a step forward. Crash. The stones piled up in front of them suddenly rolled to both sides, quickly making a wide path in the middle. Chu Luiwei froze in midair. She just wanted to pick up Rong Xiu's cloak. What the hell were these rocks doing? Chu Luiwei gritted his teeth and picked up the cloak on the ground. There was some dust on it. Chu Luiwei turned his wrist and shook it lightly. Crush. The stones gathered together again and lined up neatly in front of Chu Luiwei. Chu Luiwei? They seem to listen to you. Rong Xiu held back his laughter and took the cloak. At the same time, he leaned close to her ear and said in a teasing tone. The warm breath fell on Chu Luiwei's neck and ears, making him feel a little itchy. She shrunk her neck and turned around to glare at Rong Xiu angrily. Nonsense. Swish, 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 swish. Several stones suddenly flew up and went straight for Rong Xiu. They were extremely fast and their auras were piercingly cold. Chu Luiwei's eyes sharpened. She immediately took a step forward and the force around her surged. Sensing her movement, the stones actually stopped abruptly. Chu Luiwei stared at them. The stones drifted for a while. Sensing her aura, they quickly turned around and went back. Perhaps they were afraid of being scolded by Chu Luiwei, but they actually hid behind the stones and stayed there obediently. Chu Luiwei, Rong Xiu could not help but chuckle softly. I told you so, but you didn't believe me. Chu Luiwei's temples throbbed. 2 steps to the left. 2 steps to the right. Move forward. Forget it, take 3 steps back. Who was the one who rushed out and wanted to attack? Come out. Yes, I'm talking about you guys. Hurry up. Jump one more time for me to see. All right. Go back. Chu Luiwei rubbed her face. After a period of demonic inspection, she finally realized that Rong Xiu's words were indeed very accurate. She did not know what was wrong with these stones. They suddenly became obedient to her. She said to the left, but she did not dare to the right. She said to take 2 steps, but she definitely would not take 3. She chose a few stones to jump and they actually followed her instructions. Looking at the pile of stones in front of her, Chu Liwei felt a headache coming on. What's wrong? What went wrong in the middle? Is it because they touched me just now that they're so obedient now? Chu Liwei crossed her arms and rested her chin on one hand, deep in thought. Originally, these stones and the god domains were separated from each other. It's because they're leaning against you that they can merge with each other. This might make the fighting spirit last longer. That's why they're treating you like this. Rong Xiu explained. Chu Liwei rubbed her temples. Fighting spirit? Such a soft and harmless obedient appearance. Where was the slightest bit of fighting spirit to speak of? What happened to being incomparably fierce? What happened to being monstrous? Why did this fighting spirit completely change when it came to her? Chu Liwei could not figure it out. He could not figure it out. After pondering for a moment, there was no answer. Chu Liwei let out a long sigh. Forget it. Let's discuss these questions later. Let's go out first. As she spoke, she waved at the stones in front of her. Please make way. Crash. The piled stones immediately made a path. The 2 of them walked forward and then flew up together. Without that terrifying pressure, the 2 of them moved much more smoothly. However, not long after, Chu Liwei heard a strange fluctuation coming from below. Her heart skipped a beat and then she slowly looked down. A river formed from stones was surging from the bottom to the top. Unlike the time outside, this time the stones were very restrained and polite. They were very obedient. Everything was neat and tidy. Other than the rustling sound of wind, there was almost no sound of collision between them. If Chu Liwei had not noticed something and looked down, she might not have noticed this abnormality. Chu Liwei felt like she was going crazy. Why were these stones so difficult to deal with? She had offended many people in the past, but she had never seen anyone as persistent as these stones. Are they going to keep following us like this? Chu Liwei asked in disbelief. Rong Xiu paused and suddenly smiled. Don't you think that they're not chasing you, but they're following you? Digression. At about 12:30 p.m. mobile users please browse and read. A better reading experience comes from Love Network. The 2 of them successfully returned to the ground in about half an hour. It was already night. The sky was dark without any stars or moon. As far as the eye could see, it was still a wilderness with some broken tombstones scattered everywhere. Chu Liwei looked and said, "This is indeed not the place we went down before." Rong Xiu looked at her. "How can you be so sure? The scenery here doesn't seem to have changed much." Moreover, the sky was dark so they couldn't see clearly. It was even more difficult to distinguish. However, her tone was very certain. Because, Chu Liwei just opened his mouth but he suddenly paused. Yes. How can she be so sure? Obviously she hasn't been here before. Suddenly she looked at the interspatial ring on her hand. Because of those, she said in a low voice, a little uncertain. When she came out just now she didn't think much about it. She just intuitively knew that this was another place. This intuition probably came from those stones? That's right. They had been in the god-slaying mound for tens of thousands of years, so they were very familiar with everything here. Now, there was a subtle connection between them and Chu Liwei. Because of this, Chu Liwei naturally became more familiar with this place. Chu Liwei closed her eyes and held her breath. As expected, she seemed to be able to vaguely perceive everything within a radius of dozens of miles. Although it was not so clear, it was undoubtedly a great help for people who came to the god-slaying mound for the first time. In this way it would be much easier and safer for them to stay here. Seeing her expression, Rong Xiu's lips curved up. Can you feel the aura of Senior Shangguan and Lord Chuning? Chu Liwei shook her head, but her eyes were still bright, shining like stars. They shouldn't be here, but it should be much easier to find them later. It seemed that collecting that pile of stones had quite a lot of benefits. This made Chu Liwei feel much more at ease. That's good. Rong Xiu raised his eyes and glanced at the sky. Tomorrow is the appointed time. At this time, with one more trump card, naturally he would be more confident. Chu Luiyue nodded slightly. Suddenly, as if she felt something, she turned her head to look. Dusk was everywhere and the wilderness at night was completely dark. What's wrong? Rongxiu asked. Chu Luiyue frowned slightly. Rongxiu, did you feel anything? Rongxiu's eyes flickered slightly. What's the situation? Chu Luiyue clenched her hands, her heart beating rapidly. She opened her mouth with difficulty and said word by word. If I'm not wrong, this is the tomb of the strong masters of Venerable God. Digression, it's snowing today. See you tomorrow, mobile users. Please browse for a better reading experience from Love Network. Chapter 1646. The scenery here was not much different from what they had seen when they arrived. Even the surrounding aura was similarly cold and desolate. But Chu Luiyue could indeed feel that this place was different from the tombs of the exalted gods from before. Rongxiu narrowed his eyes. Are you sure? Chu Luiyue nodded slightly. Rongxiu looked around. His expression was still calm as he raised his eyebrows and chuckled. Even if this is really the tomb of the exalted gods, there doesn't seem to be much movement now. There's no need to worry. As he spoke, he found a clean and flat spot at the side. The agreed time will be in a few hours. Since he wants to see us, we'll just wait here. Chu Luiyue pursed her lips and there was a hint of worry in her eyes. She knew that Rongxiu was right. The other party was here for the water droplet in her body, and her father was his hostage. Before the two sides fought head-on, he definitely wouldn't do anything to her father. But, in the end, she was still worried. In country Yaochen, her father was considered a top genius and an absolute powerhouse. However, with his level and strength, he was not strong enough outside of country Yaochen. Not to mention they were in a place like the Divine Ruins world. It had been too long since her father was kidnapped. Chu Luiyue knew that he was still alive, but she didn't dare to imagine how much pain and torture he had suffered. Now that she had finally recovered her strength, she could fight with the other party without holding back. However, the closer she got, the more worried she became. And Taizu, she didn't know where he had been swept away by the void turbulence. Rongxiu walked over, gently rubbed her head and kissed her forehead. If you can't sleep, I'll play chess with you. Chu Luiyue's heart skipped a beat. In the past, whenever she was in a bad mood or was in a mess, she would be able to calm down after playing a game of chess with Rongxiu. Ever since she regained her memories, the two of them had not sparred. She paused and nodded slightly. Okay. Whoosh. The two of them stood facing each other with a distance of 10 steps between them. Rongxiu waved his sleeve and a stream of light flew out from his palm. In an instant, the stream of light split into several silver lines and intertwined in the air to form a huge chessboard. Please go first. Rongxiu placed his hands behind his back and a smile appeared on his lips. This was an unspoken rule between the two of them. Most of the time, Chu Luiyue would be the one to go first if they didn't specifically request it. Even so, Chu Luiyue still lost more than he won. Furthermore, even Chu Luiyue couldn't figure out how much Rongxiu had put in. The faint glow from the chessboard shone on her face, making her look incomparably beautiful. His pair of clear black jade-like eyes were even more dazzling. Chu Luiyue raised his hand and a red chess piece instantly fell onto the chessboard. With this soft sound, the energy around the chessboard fluctuated. Rongxiu didn't hesitate and placed his piece down as well. The energy fluctuation produced this time was exactly the same as the fluctuation produced by Chu Luiyue's piece earlier. The huge chessboard quickly returned to its original calm state. Chu Luiyue raised her eyebrows slightly. Using force as chess pieces to compete with each other was a common way for the two of them to play chess. This was even more exhausting than playing on an ordinary chessboard. Not only did it consume a lot of origin power to condense each chess piece, but it also consumed an astonishing amount of energy to maintain the stability of the chessboard after each piece was placed. Now that Chu Luiyue had recovered to the level of a high god, she could barely use this method to fight against Rongxiu. As for the outcome, it was unknown. After all, even if she had improved a lot in the past few years, Rongxiu wasn't someone to be trifled with. Time passed slowly and the huge chessboard shone brighter and brighter. On the other side, after Shangguanjing was sucked into the spatial turbulence, his surroundings were plunged into darkness. He couldn't see anything clearly. The only thing he could feel was that something seemed to have crushed his body. For an instant, Shangguanjing even felt that his muscles, bones, blood and flesh were completely crushed. Fortunately, this feeling didn't last for long. After a period of struggle, the darkness before him cracked open a crack, and he seized the opportunity to charge out of the spatial turbulence. Bam! The sky before Shangguanjing's eyes lit up. The blinding light caused him to close his eyes unconsciously. Then his body fell through the air and he fell to the ground. Bam! The dull sound was even clearer in the quiet atmosphere. Shangguanjing endured the pain in his body and slowly got up. He looked around. It was night and everything was gray and dark. He couldn't see clearly. However, under the black dome, a wall stood in the distant horizon. It was so clear. The wall was completely black. It was very tall and very long. As far as the eye could see, the head and tail of the wall couldn't be seen. Shangguanjing's heart thumped when he saw the wall. He had seen this wall before. 1,000 years ago, when he had first come to the Divine Ruins world, he had coincidentally seen this wall. At that time he only felt that it was strange. He didn't know why there was such a wall in the god-slaying tomb. After all, everyone knew that the bloody battle tens of thousands of years ago was tragic. Countless god-level experts fell together, and it almost made the world lose its color. However, there was such a wall here. It was indeed very strange. Unfortunately, he had just been betrayed at that time and he didn't have the mood to think about other things. Hence, after taking a look from afar, he quickly left in another direction. He didn't expect that when he came here again 1,000 years later, he would see the same scene again. There was no one around. In the silence, he could hear the sound of his heart beating. Shangguanjing took a deep breath and immediately moved forward. The god-slaying tomb was vast. If he didn't guess wrongly, this place was very far from where he came from. It wouldn't be that easy to meet up with you and the rest again. And in this wilderness, that wall was the only obvious landmark. If they could also see it, perhaps they could meet there. As Shangguanjing walked forward, he kept trying to search for Chu Liyue and Rong Xiu's auras. Fortunately, he didn't run into any major trouble on the way. Although he couldn't detect the auras of the two people, Shangguanjing wasn't too discouraged. On the one hand, Chu Liyue had many trump cards and her fighting strength was very strong. On the other hand, Rong Xiu was with her and would definitely protect her. If it was before, Shangguanjing might still be a little worried about this. However, after seeing with his own eyes that Rong Xiu used less than 10 days to refine a king divine weapon, he knew that he had greatly underestimated him in the past. Mobile users, please browse for a better reading experience from the Love Network. Chapter 1647. When a person was focused on doing one thing, time always passed very quickly. Chu Liyue and Rong Xiu played chess. 4 hours had passed, but they were only halfway through the game. On the glittering chessboard, the gold and red chess pieces fought against each other. Each of them occupied half of the chessboard and the battle was intense. However, Chu Liyue's emotions had indeed calmed down during the process. Moreover, the long-awaited battle with Rong Xiu had given Chu Liyue a lot of enlightenment. When the sky was slightly brighter, the game had finally reached its final stage. Chu Liyue's eyes were shining brightly when she finished her word. After a sleepless night, not only did she not look dispirited, but she also seemed to be in high spirits. Her eyes were fixed on the chessboard, but her mind was spinning crazily. In this short period of time, she had already rehearsed countless possibilities. Rong Xiu lifted his eyelids slightly and glanced at her. Seeing her eyes shining, he could not help but chuckle. After so long, she had not changed at all. Rong Xiu waved his wrist gently, and a golden chess piece condensed from force suddenly flew out from his slender white fingers and landed on the chessboard. In an instant, the situation on the chessboard changed drastically. It was as if two dragons of equal strength were fighting fiercely. They were originally evenly matched, but at this moment, a sword suddenly pierced through the air. It directly cut off the dragon head on Chu Liyue's side. One move, the outcome was decided. Chu Liyue was suddenly stunned and her eyes widened slightly. Rong Xiu's move was not within all the scenarios that she had rehearsed before. He had directly killed her without batting an eyelid. Her eyes were fixed on the chessboard. At this moment she realized that Rong Xiu had already set up a trap, and was only waiting for her to walk into it step by step. She mistakenly thought that the combat strength of both sides was equal, but in fact she was already under the control of her opponent. Bang! The chessboard shattered into countless specks of light that quickly dissipated. Chu Luiyue remained rooted to the ground as if he hadn't recovered from his shock. Rong Xiu was about to step forward when Chu Luiyue suddenly said, "Rong Xiu, protect me first. I need to think about something." Rong Xiu raised his eyebrows slightly. Since it was his wife's order, he naturally had to comply. All right. He didn't move forward and just stood there with his hands behind his back, waiting patiently. Chu Luiyue sat cross-legged with his hands on his knees. He closed his eyes and held his breath. A complicated Xian formation quietly appeared in his mind. Then the second one, the third one, more and more profound formations appeared. At a certain moment, Chu Luiyue finally began to attempt to connect these profound formations together. These were the profound formations that she had learned from De Bao in the past. Strictly speaking, they were more or less similar to the sky shuttle formation. Previously, she had always wanted to establish a connection between these profound formations and gradually figure out the mysteries of the sky shuttle formation, but she had never succeeded. However, after playing this game of chess with Rong Xiu tonight, she instantly understood something. Vaguely, she seemed to have touched an invisible barrier. Chu Luiyue's brows twitched slightly. That was the threshold of a great Xian imperial teacher. Even someone as arrogant as Chu Luiyue was stunned at this moment. She never thought that she would actually be able to touch the opportunity to break through to a great Xian imperial teacher in such a short time. Although she had already successfully broken through to become a great Xian imperial teacher some time ago, there was a huge gap between a great Xian imperial teacher and a great Xian imperial teacher. Even Elder Hua Feng had stayed in the great Xian imperial teacher for decades before finally breaking through that threshold and officially becoming a great Xian imperial teacher. And it had only been a few months for her. It was too exaggerated. Perhaps it was because she had already memorized countless high-level profound formations a few years ago. Perhaps it was because she had forcefully repaired the sky shuttle formation. Or perhaps it was because of the fight with Rong Xiu that she suddenly understood. In short, the surprise came too quickly. Since an opportunity had fallen from the sky, she naturally had to grasp it tightly. At this moment, a ray of white appeared on the horizon. Rong Xiu looked up slightly and there seemed to be waves surging in his eyes that disappeared in an instant. At the same time, in another place in the god-slaying tomb, there were also a few people slowly moving forward. Elder Wu Ping, let's rest for a while. Nanny looked at Nan Yuxing beside her. Seeing his pale face, her heart ached. Elder Wu Ping frowned slightly. Before he could speak, Nan Yuxing shook his head. We'll be there soon. Let's go over directly. Nanny had been crying all the way. At this moment, her eyes were already red and swollen like walnuts, and her pupils were also bloodshot. But big brother, your body, previously in the Red Soul Forest, Nan Yuxing was surrounded by those red leaves. It took them a lot of effort to finally escape. However, the two elders and Nanny were injured. Needless to say, Nan Yuxing almost lost his life when he went in. He was covered in wounds from head to toe, and there was not a single unscathed spot on his body. Those red leaves were also poisonous. If the two elders had not brought him out in time and used extremely precious pills, Nan Yuxing would probably still be unconscious. Along the way, Elder Bai Tong and Elder Wu Ping had been supporting Nan Yuxing in turn. Elder Bai Tong hesitated for a moment and also persuaded. Eldest young master, the thing is in the god-slaying tomb anyway. Since we've already entered, there's no need to rush. Right now your body is more important. Nan Yuxing gritted his teeth. He knew that they were doing this for his own good. However, the more they did this, the more it reminded him of how pathetic he was at this moment. He had always been proud and he had never been in such a sorry state. No need. He struggled to walk forward, but his legs suddenly gave way and he fell to the ground. Eldest young master. Big brother. Elder Bai Tong and Nanyi were both worried and hurriedly supported him. Elder Wu Peng clenched his fists in his sleeves and finally spoke. Eldest young master, you should stop and rest for a while. There's still some poison in your body that hasn't been cleansed. If you move forward rashly, I'm afraid it's not good for you. When Elder Bai Tong heard this, he hurriedly agreed. Nan Yuxing had no choice but to nod. Just as they were about to stop and rest, Elder Bai Tong glanced out of the corner of his eye and suddenly saw a somewhat familiar tall figure in the distance. The sky was about to brighten, and he stood in the morning light like a banished immortal. It's him. Not far in front of him, a woman in red was sitting cross-legged and seemed to be cultivating. It was the two people from before. Elder Bai Tong's voice attracted the attention of the other three people. Nan Yuxing looked up. When he saw the two figures clearly, endless anger and resentment surged from the bottom of his heart. If it weren't for them, how would he have fallen to such a state? Kill them. Mobile users, please browse for a better reading experience from Love Network. Chapter 1648. He was agitated and the blood in his body was surging. Just as he finished speaking, he spat out a mouthful of blood. Elder brother. Nan Yi retracted her gaze and saw her elder brother's increasingly pale face and the blood at the corner of his mouth. Her heart was in a mess. It's all my fault. It's all my fault. As Nan Yi spoke, her tears gushed out again. She bit her lips tightly and a fishy taste filled her mouth. If she hadn't been so willful, her elder brother wouldn't have. Eldest young master, your body is still very weak now. There's no hurry to take revenge. It won't be too late for us to kill them after you recover. Elder Wu Peng was still expressionless, but his voice was colder and filled with a strong murderous intent. Nan Yuxing slowly wiped the blood at the corner of his mouth and stared at the two figures for a long time before he finally said hatefully, "All right, let them live for a while longer. Anyway, they were already at the god-slaying tomb. No matter what, those two people couldn't escape from their control." Elder Bai Tong and Nan Yi helped him to the side to rest and took out another pill for him to consume. This is the last pure jade pill. After consuming it, Wu Peng and I will work together to help you completely remove the remaining poison. Your body will recover by 50 to 60%. As Elder Bai Tong spoke, an orange flame surged out of his palm. Bang! He slapped Nan Yuxing's back. The scorching heat instantly spread throughout his body. Nan Yuxing let out a muffled groan. His originally bloodless face instantly flushed red. At the same time, Elder Wu Peng walked to his side and 2 silver needles appeared in his hand. Eldest young master, bear with it. As he spoke, he had already pierced the 2 silver needles into Nan Yuxing's index fingers. Soon, black and red blood gushed out from his hands and dripped down the silver needles. Nan Yuxing's eyes were tightly shut. His body was cold and hot for a while. The torture made him tremble all over. Nan Yi watched from the side and sobbed softly. Looking at her elder brother's painful appearance, she couldn't help but look back. Her red eyes were filled with bone-chilling resentment. She must take revenge for this. Wuxia was watching Chu Liwei cultivate when suddenly he heard a clamor. He turned his gaze slightly and glanced at him indifferently. Oh, so it's them. She was really haunting him. Murderous intent flashed across Wuxia's eyes, but it disappeared quickly. Then he retracted his gaze and looked at Chu Liwei again. With a wave of his sleeves, a golden line rapidly swam across the ground. That golden line was extremely thin and it was hidden in the ground. If one did not look carefully, it would be difficult to detect it. About an hour later, the blood on Nan Yuxing's hands finally turned from black to red. As for the 2 silver needles, they had turned completely black. Elder Wu Peng pulled out the 2 needles and pulverized them with a surge of origin power in his palm. Elder Bai Tong finally removed his hand from Nan Yuxing's back and heaved a sigh of relief. All right, the poison in eldest young master's body has been completely removed. As long as he recuperates, he will recover in 10 days. Due to the pain, Nan Yuxing was drenched in sweat and looked extremely miserable. 10 days. Hearing Elder Bai Tong's words, he lowered his head and muttered as he clenched his fists. Ever since he became a high god, he had never suffered such a serious injury. But this time he was tricked by 2 people whose names and identities he didn't even know. How could he take this lying down? Elder Bai Tong had followed him for many years. How could he not know what he was thinking? His lips moved before he said, "Actually, the leaves of the Scarlet Soul Forest are extremely poisonous. Fortunately, eldest young master has been taking medicinal baths all year round. That's why he could survive until now. If it was an ordinary person, I'm afraid he wouldn't be able to survive. Nan Yuxing didn't feel comforted at all. In his opinion, if it wasn't for Chu Luiyue and Rongxiu, he would have already left the Scarlet Soul Forest. How could he have suffered such an injury? He had completely forgotten that they were the ones who had caused trouble for others first. He took a deep breath and suppressed the surging emotions in his heart. He stood up and looked ahead. Suddenly he frowned. Why are there only 2 people over there? Wasn't there another man with them? Oh right, and that little girl. He gritted his teeth as he said the last sentence. Elder Bai Tong and the others only realized that something was wrong after he said that. Yeah, could they be hiding? Elder Wu Peng looked over and shook his head. There are only 2 of them in the vicinity. Did they get lost? Nan Yuxing's mind flashed with countless guesses. Then he sneered, no matter what, they deserve it. They were outnumbered. Under such circumstances, it was even easier to deal with those 2 people. The god-slaying mound was full of dangers. It was normal for them to get lost or have accidents. These people had overestimated themselves. Who could they blame? Just as he was about to step forward, Elder Wu Peng stopped him. First, young master, let's wait for a while. Nan Yuxing frowned. What are we waiting for? Those 2 people are right in front of us. It's easy to go over and kill them. What's there to hesitate and wait for? Elder Wu Peng glanced at him. Have you forgotten where we are? Nan Yuxing's expression changed slightly. Yes, this was the tomb of the supreme god experts. It was extremely difficult for ordinary people to enter this place. Even a supreme god expert might not be able to reach this place in such a short time. Let alone those 2 people. More importantly, they didn't seem to be injured. Could it be, they have a way to get here directly? Sure enough, they were also here for that thing. Nan Yuxing's expression changed. Elder Wu Ping pondered for a while. We can't be sure about this yet, but we can be sure that they are very capable or have extraordinary treasures on them. Otherwise, they wouldn't have been able to reach this place unscathed. Also, this old man has no clue as to the identity of that little girl. Speaking of this, Elder Wu Ping frowned tightly. This question had been bothering him for a long time, but he still couldn't find an answer. That little girl looked like she was only 3 or 4 years old, but her combat power was shocking. She could send Nan Yuxing flying with a punch without using her force. Most importantly, the little girl had never shown her face before. She just had to appear when the eldest young master was about to kill that woman. It was too strange. Nan Yuxing gritted his teeth. That little girl is definitely in disguise. He still remembered the taste of that punch. Mobile users, please browse for a better reading experience from Love Network. They started walking towards Rongxiu and Chu Luiyue. This place was flat and spacious. The scattered tombstones were not enough to cover their figures. But they never thought about this and just went straight ahead. His opponent was nothing to worry about. He could just kill him directly. Why waste time and energy on other things? Rongxiu naturally heard their movements, but he didn't take it to heart. He stood in front of Chu Luiyue, waiting quietly and patiently. Breaking through from a mystic imperial master to a great mystic imperial master was definitely not that simple. So before she broke through, he would help her get rid of all distracting factors. What a coincidence! Nan Yuxing sneered. His eyes moved between Rongxiu and Chu Luiyue with undisguised killing intent. I didn't expect that we would meet here again. Rongxiu ignored him. He didn't even look at him. Such an indifferent attitude angered Nan Yuxing more than contempt and mockery. The smile on his face quickly faded and was replaced by a layer of coldness. I'm talking to you, didn't you hear me? Rongxiu raised his eyebrows and glanced at him lazily. Don't disturb others when they are busy. Don't you understand such a simple principle? You impudent. Nan Yuxing knew that the other party was arrogant and impudent, but he didn't expect him to be so bold in such a situation. Was he too confident in himself, or did he not realize the danger he was facing? To be able to come here, you do have some ability. Unfortunately, that's all. Nan Yuxing took a deep breath and revealed a sinister smile. If you kneel down and beg for mercy now, I will spare your corpses. Hearing this, Rongxiu raised his eyebrows. He hadn't heard anyone speak to him like this for a long time. What if I say no? Nan Yuxing was so angry that he laughed. You really don't know the immensity of heaven and earth. Even if you want to beg for mercy later, you won't have such a chance again. Rong Xiu suddenly raised his eyes and looked at the sky. Then he looked at them with a faint smile. You can't afford to offend me. I'm not interested in your lives. For Nan Yifan's sake I'll let you go this time. But, my patience is limited. If you do this again I won't be so polite anymore. Hearing this, Nan Yuxing and the others' faces changed. Because Nan Yifan was Nan Yuxing and Nan Yi's father, and also their patriarch. They looked at each other and saw the shock and suspicion in each other's eyes. This man seemed to know their identities like the back of his hand. And from his tone it seemed like his identity wasn't ordinary either. Otherwise he wouldn't have called Nan Yifan by his name. Who are you? Nan Yuxing's face was extremely ugly. He thought that the other party was an ignorant and fearless lackey, but now it seemed that he wasn't. Elder Bai Tong suddenly thought of something. Rong Xiu, wait. He suddenly raised his head and stared at Rong Xiu in disbelief. You're the Yuntian Tower's holy son, Rong Xiu? They had heard the woman call him that before, but they didn't care at that time. On one hand they weren't familiar with the Yuntian Tower and Rong Xiu. They had never seen them before so they didn't think about it at all. On the other hand there were countless people with the same name in the world. It was impossible for them to recognize one person immediately, right? It wasn't until now that Rong Xiu took the initiative to mention Nan Yifan's name that they realized that something was wrong. Nan Yuxing's expression changed a few times, and finally revealed a ruthless look. The Yuntian Tower's holy son. Is he that amazing? Since you know our identity you should kneel down and beg for mercy. In the Divine Ruins world, other families and sects might be afraid of the Yuntian Tower but they weren't. This Rong Xiu knew their identity but he was still so arrogant. If he didn't die who would? Rong Xiu pinched the bridge of his nose. Now he felt a little pity for Nan Yifan. He actually gave birth to such a brainless successor. He raised his eyes, looked at the few of them and asked softly, So you guys don't want to leave? So, you're saying that you don't want to leave? Chapter 1650. He spoke slowly and calmly, his expression calm and even gentle. However, when these words entered their ears, they inexplicably felt a chill run down their spines. Meeting that pair of deep and bottomless phoenix eyes, Nan Yuxing suddenly felt an inexplicable fear in his heart. However, this emotion was quickly suppressed by him. He was the young master of the Nan family. Why would he be afraid of a Yuntian Tower? Rong Xiu, I know that you've become famous in the Divine Ruins world in the past few years. I admit that you're indeed powerful. Otherwise, you wouldn't have reached your current position. Unfortunately, there's one thing you don't know. There are some people that you can't afford to offend. As Nan Yuxing spoke, he shouted at the two elders. Let's end this quickly. As long as they killed these two people, no one would know that they were the culprits. They would bury this news forever. However, Elder Wu Peng frowned slightly. Young master, I'm afraid this is a little inappropriate. Although he didn't know much about Rong Xiu, he had heard some rumors about him. His methods were ruthless and decisive. He was indeed a ruthless character. The most important thing was that what he said just now didn't seem to be an act. To be able to say the name of the patriarch directly, he wasn't ordinary. Moreover, he did it so casually. Could it be that this Rong Xiu really knew the patriarch? Nan Yuxing was instantly dissatisfied. Elder Wu Ping, you've always been swift and decisive. Why are you so hesitant today? The other party had already bullied them to such an extent. If they still didn't retaliate, they would be laughed at. It was just killing two people. What kind of trouble could it cause? Elder Wu Peng's lips moved. He wanted to persuade a little more, but Elder Bai Tong hurriedly gave him a look. What was there to argue about? The second miss was humiliated by them and the young master lost half his life. Even if the patriarch was here, he would definitely choose to take action. Besides, they could just kill them and dispose of their bodies without anyone knowing. No one in the world would know. What was the point of worrying so much? Elder Wu Peng's expression was cold. In the end, he swallowed the rest of his words. Whoosh! A greenish-black sickle appeared in Elder Wu Peng's hand. The cold light was biting cold, extremely sharp. First young master and second miss, please step back. Elder Wu Ping said in a deep voice. Elder Bai Tong took a step forward at the same time, the origin power around him surging. From the looks of it, they were clearly going to fight to the death. Rong Xiu glanced at them indifferently, then retracted his gaze as if he didn't care about the situation. His attitude finally enraged the two elders. Go! Elder Wu Ping bellowed and took the lead to charge forward. Boom! Elder Bai Tong flicked his sleeve. An orange flame condensed into a long whip and shot straight at Chu Liyue. However, right at this moment, Elder Bai Tong suddenly felt a sharp pain come from his leg. He immediately lowered his head to look and his pupils shrank. At some point in time his ankle had been entangled by a golden thread. The thread was as thin as hair, and it had appeared silently without any energy fluctuations. That was why he didn't notice it and didn't even know that he had been entangled. A ball of flame appeared in his hand again and he wanted to burn it directly. However, what shocked Elder Bai Tong was that the golden thread was extremely tough. His flame had no effect on it at all. In fact, as the flame burned, the power in it was inexplicably gradually devoured by the golden thread. The golden thread tightened. There was a sharp pain and dark red blood stains gradually seeped through his clothes. Elder Bai Tong was even more shocked. How could the golden thread be so powerful? Although he specialized in celestial physician, he was also a high god in terms of cultivation. Moreover, with the help of pills, his physical strength was stronger than ordinary cultivators of the same level. Why was he injured by the golden thread now? Elder Bai Tong sensed the danger. With a flick of his wrist, he withdrew the flame whip and began to deal with the golden thread around his ankle with all his strength. However, things didn't go as he wished. The golden thread began to spread upward at an even faster speed. In a short while his entire calf was tightly wrapped by the golden thread. Moreover, the golden thread continued to tighten throughout the process. More and more blood stains appeared on Elder Bai Tong's body. He finally panicked. What the hell was this? Swoosh! A greenish-black blade of light flashed past. Elder Wu Ping had sensed the danger on his side and changed direction midway to attack. The sharp scythe slashed down fiercely. The golden thread broke silently. Elder Bai Tong finally heaved a sigh of relief. Wu Ping, thank you, be careful. Before he could finish his sentence, Elder Bai Tong's eyes suddenly widened as he exclaimed. Elder Wu Ping focused his gaze and saw that the broken golden thread had split into two and was wrapping around the two of them. In the blink of an eye, Elder Wu Ping's scythe was wrapped by the golden thread. Moreover, it was still spreading toward Elder Wu Ping. Elder Wu Ping was about to swing his scythe when he realized that under the entanglement of the golden thread, his scythe seemed to have increased by thousands of kilograms, making it difficult to swing. Every single movement became extremely difficult. Nanyu Xing and Nanyi, who were watching from behind, were also shocked when they saw this scene. How could this Rong Xiu be so strong? At this moment Chu Liyue frowned slightly. Rong Xiu's expression turned cold. I already said that you're not allowed to disturb my wife's cultivation. He raised his wrist and suddenly pulled. Mobile users, please browse for a better reading experience from Love Network. Chapter 1651. The extremely flexible golden thread instantly tightened. Then, it directly dragged the greenish-black sickle out of Elder Wu Peng's hand. Elder Wu Peng was caught off guard, and his yuan item was easily taken away by Rong Xiu. Then the sickle flew to Rong Xiu under everyone's gaze. With a wave of his hand, the sickle appeared in his hand. The heaven-breaking sickle. If I remember correctly, this should be the first King Divine weapon that Elder Wu Peng made, right? It was also because of this that Elder Wu Peng finally became a King Divine weapon refiner. Therefore, even though Elder Wu Peng was already a venerable weapon refiner, he still valued this divine weapon very much. Elder Wu Peng's half-frozen face became even colder. This Rong Xiu, how did he even know about this? Swoosh! A dagger suddenly appeared in Rong Xiu's other hand. The dagger was only the length of one's hand. The handle was black and heavy, but the blade was as thin as a cicada's wing and almost transparent. Under the sunlight, it shone faintly. Elder Wu Peng's heart skipped a beat. Crack. A crisp breaking sound was heard. It was Elder Wu Peng's sickle, which had been directly cut in half by Rong Xiu's dagger. The cut surface was neat and smooth. Rong Xiu seemed to have destroyed Elder Wu Peng's most beloved King Divine weapon without any effort. He raised his eyebrows slightly and raised his eyes slightly. He said with a faint smile, "Elder Wu Peng, it seems that your King Divine weapon is not that great." Elder Wu Peng's face instantly darkened. "Rong Xiu, how dare you?" The number of King Divine weapons that he had refined in his lifetime was no less than 5. However, among them the one that he valued the most was this heaven-breaking scythe. Even though he was now a venerable weapon refiner, he still valued this King Divine weapon very much. Back then he had been stuck as a high-level weapon refiner for many years, but he was still unable to break through the threshold of a King Divine weapon refiner. Over time this had almost become his inner demon. Later on, under a series of coincidences, he finally succeeded in refining this king artifact. Not only did he successfully break through his shackles, he even broke through his own predicament. From then on, his path of cultivation was unimpeded. It was because of this that he attached great importance to this heaven-breaking scythe. Now that Rong Xiu had destroyed it in front of him, how could he not be angry? How could he swallow this anger? However, in addition to his hatred, there was also a deep shock in his heart. The dagger in Rong Xiu's hand was small and agile. It did not look much different from an ordinary dagger. But just now he had easily destroyed a King Divine artifact. In other words, this dagger was either an outstanding Emperor artifact or... A shrill scream suddenly came from the side. Elder Wu Peng was shocked and hurriedly turned his head to look. He saw that Elder Bai Tong's calf had been tightly wrapped by the golden thread again. And from the looks of it, it was even worse than the previous time. His clothes were messy with bloodstains and his flesh and blood could be vaguely seen from the wound. It was a ghastly sight. Elder Bai Tong's face was pale and he almost fainted from the pain. The golden thread was not ordinary. Not only could it easily cut through flesh, but the edges of the wound also carried extreme burning pain. The golden thread tightened, and where it tightened, it was as if there were red-hot iron rods scraping past his body. Sizzle, a scalp-numbing burning sound came. Elder Bai Tong trembled as he lowered his head to take a look. For a moment his mind was blank. Burn wounds had actually appeared on his legs. His skin, blood and flesh were even terrifyingly charred. Elder Bai Tong began to struggle desperately, using all his strength to try to break free. But no matter what he did, the golden thread would not disperse. Every time it was broken, it would become stronger and more numerous. One of the threads suddenly tightened. An ice-cold pain instantly spread throughout his body. Half of Elder Bai Tong's calf had been silently sliced apart. The incision on the wound was very neat and even the ghastly white bone could be seen. This scene deeply agitated Elder Bai Tong, causing him to be shocked and angry. Deep in his heart, there was also a strong sense of fear that spread. Many emotions surged and finally he could not bear it anymore. His chest shook violently and he spat out a mouthful of blood before falling heavily to the ground. Bang! With a muffled sound, smoke and dust rose from the ground. Elder Bai Tong, Nan Yuxing and Nan Yi finally regained their senses, and they could hardly believe their eyes. The two elders attacked together, but they were actually at a disadvantage. Rong Xiu, how did he do it? Elder Wu Peng stared at the wound on Elder Bai Tong's body and gradually clenched his fists. Bai Tong was a celestial physician, and he could transform his force into flames to refine pills. Therefore ordinary flames could not hurt him at all. But now he was burned by a golden thread and half of his leg was directly cut off by the other party. This Rong Xiu was clearly more terrifying than the rumors. Just what level had his strength reached? Elder Wu Peng was about to speak, but Rong Xiu suddenly raised a finger. Shoo! There was a clear light in his deep eyes, but the expression between his brows was distant, disdainful and indifferent. Elder Wu Peng suddenly seemed to be strangled by something, and the rest of his words were silently crushed in his throat, and he could no longer say anything. In Chu Liu's mind, several Xian formations were arranged in a disorderly and picturesque manner. Each Xian formation was shining brightly, and its might was awe-inspiring. However, they were all separated from each other by a great distance. A stream of light flew out from the Xian formation in the middle, and quickly connected with the Xian formation beside it. Then a second and third one followed. Chu Liu's heart unconsciously tensed up. She wanted to connect all these Xian formations together, but it was not easy to do so. She could no longer remember how many times she had tried, and her physical and mental strength were greatly depleted. The only consolation was that her results would be more outstanding than the previous time. It was also this that supported Chu Liyue to grit her teeth and persevere. More and more Xian formations were connected. The might on them also began to stack layer upon layer. Finally, there was only one Xian formation left. Chu Liyue subconsciously held her breath, and her mind was extremely tense. She knew too well what it meant if she succeeded this time. If she did not experience it personally, even she would not believe that someone could attempt to break through from a Xian Emperor Master to a great Xian Emperor Master in just a few months. Bang bang. Bang bang. Chu Liyue's heart was beating rapidly, and it was almost about to jump out of her chest. But actually, thinking about it carefully, this matter was also within reason. Because she had already become a Xian Emperor Master a few years ago. Countless incomparably mysterious Xian formations were recorded in her mind. She could not help but thank Debao for this. If not for him, she would not have been able to reach this step so quickly. Chu Liyue's thoughts moved. The last stream of light flew out lightly and tightly connected with the last Xian formation. Mobile users, please browse and read. A better reading experience comes from Love Network. Chapter 1652. Crack. An indistinct but clear shattering sound could be heard. Chu Liyue suddenly opened her eyes. In an instant, there seemed to be stars flickering in the depths of her eyes, incomparably resplendent. An indescribable pressure spread out from her body. A great mystic king teacher. Rong Xiu's thin lips curled up slightly. He knew that she could succeed. This matter might be as difficult as ascending to the heavens for ordinary people. But to Chu Liyue, who had repaired the sky shuttle formation before, it was much easier. However, this scene caused the nearby first-tier people to be dumbstruck. This aura is... Nanny was a mystic master and had good talent, so she was especially sensitive to this. Her eyes widened slightly and her face was filled with disbelief. That woman looked to be only 17 or 18 years old. How could she have broken through to a great mystic king teacher? Even she, who was already 24 years old, had yet to see the threshold of a great mystic king teacher. She couldn't help but grab Nan Yuxing's sleeve. Big brother, did I sense wrongly? Nan Yuxing's expression was extremely ugly. Although he wasn't a mystic master, he had seen many mystic masters. That woman had indeed broken through to a great mystic king teacher. If he hadn't seen it with his own eyes, even he wouldn't have believed that there was such a young great mystic king teacher in this world. Moreover, she seemed to have broken through in less than a day. She must have used some method. Nan Yuxing gritted his teeth. When Nanyi heard this, she dispelled the last bit of hope in her heart. How was that possible? Martial artists might be able to use some method to forcefully increase their strength and realm within a certain period of time. But it was absolutely impossible for a mystic master. She had broken through, so it was true. Nanyi's body swayed and she almost fell to the ground. Everything in front of her was too big a blow to her. First, Elder Bai Tong and Elder Wu Peng were suppressed by Rong Xiu one after another. Then that woman broke through to become a great mystic king teacher. If she still had a certain amount of pride in this aspect before and thought that she was more outstanding than the other party, all of this had been shattered now. Elder Wu Peng had just finished treating Elder Bai Tong's injuries. When he sensed the commotion, he lifted his head to take a look. His eyes were deep. At this point, if they still underestimated the Rong Xiu duo, they would be extremely stupid. Nan Yuxing couldn't help but take a step forward. Elder Wu Peng, we can't let them live. Elder Wu Peng frowned with complicated emotions in his eyes. Of course, he knew that if he allowed the two of them to leave, there would be endless trouble in the future. But Nan Yuxing and Bai Tong were severely injured, and Nanyi was clearly weaker than the other party. Even if he went all out, he might not be able to finish them off before the two of them sent out the news. If word of this got out, they would still be in trouble. At that time, the situation would only get worse. More importantly, they had come to the Godslayer mound in search of that thing. He had yet to find the item, but he was already heavily injured. If it was delayed because of this, then the gains would not make up for the losses. Elder Wu Peng lowered his eyes and glanced at Elder Bai Tong. Bai Tong, what do you think? Elder Bai Tong's face was pale and resentful. No one would be able to accept having their calf chopped off so easily. Not to mention someone like Elder Bai Tong. He had never thought that after being so powerful for so long, he would be defeated by such a young man in the end. He wanted to take revenge more than anyone else. But he also knew what Elder Wu Peng was thinking. After hesitating for a while, Elder Bai Tong finally gritted his teeth and said, "Let's go back first, Elder Bai Tong." Nan Yuxing suddenly interrupted him, almost thinking that he had heard wrongly. He had lost a part of his calf. And now he was planning to let it go? Elder Bai Tong closed his eyes. How could he not want revenge? But in the current situation, leaving first was the best choice. After finding that thing and completing the mission given by the patriarch, wouldn't they have plenty of time and opportunities to look for the two of them? Nan Yuxing gradually clenched his fists. At first he only wanted to find trouble with them and teach them a lesson because they had humiliated his sister. But now, they had suffered losses and been humiliated by the other party. Nan Yuxing, who was used to being high and mighty, could not accept this. He slowly looked up. Chu Liyue had completely woken up from her breakthrough state. She had just stood up when Xiao walked over. "Congratulations, you The coldness in his eyes melted at this moment and was replaced by a gentle smile. Chu Liyue also smiled, her eyes curved. "It's all thanks to your guidance. If not for that game of chess with Xiao, she did not know when she would be able to comprehend and break through." Xiao raised his eyebrows, bowed his head slightly, looked into her eyes seriously and asked with a low smile. "Then, is there a reward?" The two of them were very close at this moment. When he spoke, a warm breath and a faint cold fragrance silently wrapped around Chu Liyue. Chu Liyue stretched out her finger and lightly tapped on his chest. She leaned back slightly and her red lips curled up slightly. "There are people here. Your Highness, please restrain yourself." As she spoke, she turned around and looked at those people. Her eyes curved as she greeted them. "Gentlemen, what a coincidence. We meet again." "Coincidence? Coincidence, my ass." Seeing the smile on Chu Liyue's face, the suppressed anger in Nan Yuxing and the rest's hearts burned fiercely. This woman definitely did it on purpose. Relying on the fact that she had broken through to the great mystic king master level, she did not put others in her eyes. "You." Nan Yuxing was furious. "You don't know what's good for you." Chu Liyue blinked in surprise as if she had not realized what had happened. "I wonder if this young master," Nan Yuxing Xiao reminded. There was no need to be polite with such people. Chu Liyue coughed. "I wonder where young Master Nan Yu's words came from? Playing dumb." Nan Yuxing laughed in anger. "You really don't know? Don't tell me that you don't know what the man beside you did. Moreover, that little girl in the Scarlet Soul Forest was summoned by this woman. Come to think of it, these two people still owed them." Chu Liyue looked at Xiao. She touched her chin with one hand as if she was thinking about something. "My husband, hasn't he always been helping you?" Nan Yuxing and the rest could not believe that Chu Liyue could say such words. They were in an extremely sorry state and were covered in wounds. Wasn't it all caused by Xiao? She actually had the nerve to lie through her teeth. "Ah, good, good. I finally understand now. There's nothing to say to the two of you." A string in Nan Yuxing's mind suddenly snapped. With a flick of his sleeve, something quickly flew towards Chu Liyue. Mobile users, please browse for a better reading experience from the Love Network. Chapter 1653. His attack was too sudden and his movements were extremely fast. By the time everyone reacted, that thing had already flown in front of Chu Liyue. Chu Liyue looked over. It was a completely white jade toad. The jade toad's carvings were extremely detailed. Under the white skin, one could even faintly see faint red bones and blood vessels. Those pair of dark eyes seemed to be filled with coldness, causing one to feel a chill in their hearts. At first glance it was extremely lifelike, almost no different from the real thing. Chu Liyue's eyes turned cold. It seemed that Nan Yuxing really wanted her life. He had even taken out this thing. This jade toad was carved out of an extremely rare 1,000-year-old cold jade. Its entire body was filled with dense poisonous gas and was extremely lethal. If one wanted to unleash the full power of this jade toad, It would need to be placed in the body of a cultivator and nourished with their essence, blood and qi. The longer the time, the more powerful the jade toad would be. However, during this process the cultivator would have to endure extreme pain. The longer the time, the more terrifying the torture would be. From the looks of this jade toad, Nan Yuxing must have spent a lot of effort on it. Now that he had taken out this item, it was obvious that he really wanted her life. Wuxia was about to attack when he suddenly raised his eyebrows and stopped. Chu Liyue narrowed her eyes and a cluster of golden flames suddenly appeared in her palm. The jade toad was about to fly over. At this moment, a black light blade suddenly appeared out of nowhere. Clang! The two collided with a crisp sound. Then the jade toad instantly flew out and fell to the ground. A crack could be clearly seen on its back. Before Nan Yuxing's smile could fully spread, it suddenly froze. This jade toad was refined by him after a year of hard work. He usually treasured it and rarely used it. He did not expect it to be destroyed just like that. One must know that once a crack appeared on it, it could not be repaired. It was equivalent to a year's worth of hard work being wasted. He looked at Chu Liyue and Wuxia in shock and anger as blood rushed to his head. You, young Master Nanyu, you saw it clearly. It was not the two of us who attacked. Before he could say anything, Chu Liyue spoke first. Nan Yuxing was so angry that he felt dizzy. Not the two of you. Then who could it be? A ghost. However, Elder Wu Peng frowned. He saw clearly that Wuxia and Wuxia did not move. That black light blade indeed seemed to have appeared out of thin air. He looked at the black blade of light. After knocking the jade toad down, it quietly floated in the air. The dense black color seemed to want to swallow everything around it. An inexplicable sense of uneasiness arose in his heart. Young master. He took a step back of his voice. A low and hoarse voice suddenly came from the black blade of light. How can I allow others to covet the people I want to kill? Indifference, disdain and sinister. It was filled with a strong killing intent. It was almost enough to make one shudder. As soon as the words were spoken, a terrifying aura descended upon the place. Nan Yuxing had not recovered from his serious injuries. Now that he was overwhelmed by anger, he could not bear the pressure and spat out a mouthful of blood. Big brother. Nan Yi hurriedly supported him, her face full of anxiety. What's wrong? Who is speaking? She looked in the direction of the voice. She was shocked and angry, but more than that, she was deeply afraid. Although she was usually spoiled and willful, she was still very talented in cultivation. Otherwise, she would not have been so doted on. She could clearly feel that the owner of that voice was terrifyingly strong. Who are you? The black light blade gradually transformed into a tall figure from the thick black fog. That person was wearing a long black robe. The hood hung down and covered his face, making it impossible to see clearly. A strong murderous aura spread from his body. Nan Yi's remaining words were suddenly stuck in her throat. She subconsciously covered her mouth and took a step back in fear. This person is too dangerous. That man looked at Nan Yuxing. Were you the one who attacked just now? He asked slowly, but every word seemed to carry a bone-piercing chill. The pressure around Nan Yuxing increased again. He could not bear it and directly knelt on the ground. Bang! Elder Wu Ping immediately stood in front of him and said in a low voice, "Sir, let's talk things over." His mind raced as he recalled everything that had happened just now. An absurd guess appeared in his heart. Sensing the dangerous aura from the other party, he swallowed with difficulty and his throat tightened. We have no intention of going against you. It's just that we have some grudges with these two people. Eldest young master was angry and attacked. But we really have no other intentions. The black-robed man looked at Chu Liyue and let out a strange laugh, but no one could detect any laughter. Shengguanyu, you are as good at causing trouble as always. I'm just a little late and you've already provoked another enemy. It seems that there are really many people who want to kill you. Chu Liyue smiled. Thank you for the compliment. I actually don't like to cause trouble. Trouble often comes to me. They're like that. Aren't you the same? Hearing Chu Liyue's words, Elder Wu Peng and the others were secretly shocked. It seems that Shengguanyu really knows this mysterious black-robed man? And she seemed to have expected that he would appear? The black-robed man suddenly sneered. You are as bold as ever. Chu Liyue smiled and nodded. How can I be considered bold? You asked me to come here to die, so I'm here now. The two of them only spoke a few words, but there was an undercurrent surging. Nanyu Xing and the others were completely stunned at this moment. Judging from this, they seemed to have made an agreement to fight to the death here, right? Then, as if sensing their gazes, Chu Liwei looked back and curled the corners of her lips into a half-smile. I've already said that my husband helped you out of kindness, but you didn't appreciate it. Now it's better for you to stay here with us. But whether you live or die depends on your own abilities. Elder Wu Peng had already realized the seriousness of the matter. Although he didn't know the identity of the other party, he knew that with the other party's strength, it would be easy for the other party to keep them here. They were here to look for something, not to die. Sir, today's matter is purely a misunderstanding. We have no intention of fighting with you. We'll leave now and make room for you. As Elder Wu Peng spoke, he took a step back and was about to leave with the others. Wait. Mobile users, please browse for a better reading experience from Love Network. Chapter 1654. Did I allow you to leave? The black-robed man spoke slowly. Every word was like a mountain that weighed heavily on the hearts of Nanyu Xing and the others. Elder Wu Peng turned around and cupped his fists. We really didn't mean to disturb you and have already apologized. May I know what else you're unhappy about? Was there something wrong with this person? Since he wanted to kill Shangguanyu, why didn't he just do it directly? What did it have to do with them? Even if Nanyu Xing attacked just now, he didn't hit him. Didn't he stop him? Wasn't that enough? Elder Wu Peng was a weapon refining supremacy and had a high status. When had he ever spoken so humbly to anyone? If Nanyu Xing and Elder Bai Tong weren't injured today and they still had important matters to attend to, he definitely wouldn't be so polite to this person. Pfft. The man sneered disdainfully as if he had heard a joke. You casually trespassed into my territory, acted presumptuously, and then left just like that. How can there be such a good thing in this world? Elder Wu Peng was shocked. You said this is your territory. Nanyi couldn't help but say. Who doesn't know that countless experts are buried in the god-slaying ground? But now you say this is your territory. Do you really think we're that easy to fool? Although she was a little afraid of the black-robed man, she couldn't help but refute him. Of all things, why did he say this was his territory? This was the tombs of the god-slaying ground. The black-robed man suddenly raised his hand and clenched it. Nanyi suddenly felt as if her neck was being strangled by an invisible hand. Her entire body was lifted up. Because she couldn't breathe, her face quickly flushed red. No matter how hard she struggled, she couldn't break free. The second miss. Nanyu Xing and the others panicked when they saw this scene. They didn't expect the black-robed man to attack without saying anything. Elder Wu Peng wanted to fight back, but after thinking carefully, since the other party appeared here, whether this was his territory or not, it would definitely be beneficial to him. It wouldn't be good if he acted rashly. Sir, we're from the Nan family of the All Saints sect. Please think twice before you act. Do you really want to go against the All Saints sect? The black-robed man chuckled. So you are from the Nan family. No wonder you are so arrogant. It was a pity that he didn't seem to have a brain. Nanyu Xing couldn't help but take a step forward. You, Elder Bai Tong hurriedly pulled him back. Young master. The second miss was still in his hands. Nanyu Xing gritted his teeth and forced himself to endure. Elder Wu Peng didn't look any better. The humiliation and torment they had suffered today was more than what they had suffered in the past few years combined. Unfortunately, Nanyi was in his hands now and they didn't dare to do anything. The strength of Nanyi's struggle gradually weakened, leaving only blurred words that came out of her mouth. Didn't you want to kill her? Since this man's target was the Shangguanyu, why didn't he attack her directly instead of torturing her? However, she did not know that their actions just now had already angered the other party. Due to the lack of oxygen, her vision began to darken and her consciousness began to blur. Just when Nanny thought that she was really going to die here, the man in the black robe finally let go. Bam! Nanny's body was thrown heavily to the ground. The rough ground left many scratches on her body. The clothes on her back were torn, revealing streaks of bright red scars. Ah! Nan Yi was angry and embarrassed, but she didn't even have the strength to get up. Elder Wu Peng hurriedly went over, took out a coat and draped it over her and helped her up. Seeing Nan Yi's miserable appearance, it was impossible for Nan Yuxing and the others to not be angry. But now it was good enough that she was back. They didn't dare to ask for anything else. Killing you will dirty my hands. The man in the black robe said casually. Nan Yi's face was red and white, but she didn't dare to say another word. Her body was trembling violently. Chu Liwei crossed her arms and raised her eyebrows slightly. It was a pity that a good show had ended just like that. However, she didn't want to use this man to get rid of those people. This man was here for her, so he naturally wasn't interested in others. It was already a pleasant surprise to see them suffer. She exhaled softly, looked at the man in the black robe and said with a faint smile. Let's get to the main topic quickly. If we continue to pester them like this, it won't be good to delay them from finding the treasure. Nan Yuxing and the others' expressions changed. Could it be that Shangguan Yu already knew the purpose of their trip? But looking at her expression, it didn't seem like it. Treasure? The man in the black robe was stunned for a moment, then seemed to realize something and laughed ambiguously. Nan Yuxing and the others became even more nervous. However, just when they thought that the man in the black robe was going to make things difficult for them, they suddenly heard him say, "Why aren't you getting lost?" Elder Wu Peng made a prompt decision and hurriedly left with the three of them. They were more or less injured, but their speed was surprisingly fast. In a short while their figures were already far away. It was as if they were afraid that the man in the black robe would regret it. "I'm here for the appointment. Where's my father?" The person in the way had already left, so Chu Liwei went straight to the point. The smile on her face faded a lot and the aura around her became cold. The man in the black robe waved his sleeve. The void beside him trembled. Then a black cage quietly appeared. A familiar figure was chained up by a chain and trapped within it. It was Chu Ning, whom she hadn't seen for a long time. At this moment he was in a sorry state, thin and haggard. His clothes were tattered and stained with dirty blood. His hair was messy and scattered, almost covering half of his face. Chu Liwei could only see his unusually pale and cracked lips. However, with just one glance she recognized that the person was Chu Ning. "Father." Chu Liu's heart was suddenly filled with endless sorrow. The man in the black robe suddenly laughed. "Speaking of which, this Chu Ning was only fated with you for a short period of time. I didn't expect that you would really be willing to come to save him." Chu Liu suppressed her emotions and laughed coldly. "Didn't you already know when you attacked him?" She was reborn into Chu Liu's body and became father and daughter with Chu Ning. Although they didn't spend much time together, during that time, Chu Ning had always treated her as his own daughter. He gave his heart and soul to her and even risked his life for her. In Chu Liu's heart she had long regarded him as her father. She was Shangguan Yu and also Chu Liu. Therefore, even if she knew that this trip was full of danger, she still came. "You did everything you could to get me to come here. Now that I'm here, you should keep your promise and let my father go." Digression. The fifth watch was around 12:30 p.m. Mobile users, please browse and read. A better reading experience comes from Love Network. Chapter 1655. If you want me to let him go, it's very simple. The black-robed man stretched out his hand. "Just give me that thing." Under the sleeve was a translucent palm. It could be seen that this time he appeared as a soul and did not possess another body. Chu Liu narrowed her eyes slightly. This man's strength seemed to be much stronger than before. But perhaps it was because the previous ones were just his doppelgangers. And the one in front of her was the real him. This time he set the meeting place at the god-slaying tomb. Chu Liu guessed that he should have some plans. Sure enough, this was probably the only place where he could unleash his full strength. Although they had not officially fought from the situation just now, there was no doubt that he was almost at the level of a god. Chu Liu thought and frowned slightly. Previously she had secretly inquired about this person's identity. He used to be a member of the Black Demon Cave and his status was not low, but later he was expelled from the sect. It was reasonable to say that such a person should be easy to find. However, Chu Liu could not find any relevant information. The Black Demon Cave seemed to have sealed this information, and there was no news about it in the outside world. So until now she was still not clear about the other party's identity. What, could it be that we haven't seen each other for so long that you have forgotten what I want? The black-robed man's tone seemed to be a little impatient. Chu Liyue looked up and curled the corners of her lips without a smile. Of course not. For that water droplet, this man had schemed against her countless times. How could she forget? She lifted her foot and walked forward. Rong Xiu suddenly spoke. Chu Liyue turned around. The two of them looked at each other. Be careful. Chu Liyue gently nodded, then turned and continued to walk forward. Rong Xiu stood in place, one hand behind his back and his phoenix eyes slightly raised. The black-robed man seemed to have sensed something and laughed. Rong Xiu could indeed protect her. But here even Rong Xiu was no match for him. Fortunately, Rong Xiu was a smart person and did not seem to have any intention of fighting. At this moment, Chu Liyue was only 10 steps away from the black-robed man. She stood still. Hand over the person, hand over the goods. The black-robed man did not hesitate. With a wave of his sleeve, the cage flew directly to Chu Liyue. As long as you give it to me obediently, this cage will automatically disperse. But if you try to play any tricks, trust me, he will only die faster. The black-robed man's voice was hoarse and gloomy. At this moment, there was a hint of threat in his voice, which made people feel even more uncomfortable. Chu Liyue ignored him and looked at Chu Ning in the cage. She was a little far away just now and she was in a hurry, so she didn't get a good look. At this moment the two of them were only one step apart. She could see every wound on Chu Ning's body clearly. He must have fainted. Both of them had been talking for so long, but he still hadn't woken up. His injuries should be very serious. Chu Liyue's heart seemed to be tightly gripped by something, and she found it difficult to breathe. After so long she didn't know how much Daddy had suffered, and all of this was because of her. If it wasn't for her, he might still be in Yaochen living a peaceful life. He wouldn't be wandering around and suffering like he was now. Chu Liyue's eyes were sour and hot tears fell silently. Father. Chu Ning's brows suddenly moved. In his dizziness he seemed to have heard a familiar voice. A strong desire to meet him burned wildly in the depths of his heart. Then Chu Ning's eyelashes trembled and he actually slowly opened his eyes. Chu Liyue had been looking at him the whole time, so of course she noticed his movements immediately. For a moment she was both surprised and happy. Father. You're awake? Chu Ning had been unconscious for too long. Now that he suddenly opened his eyes, he felt that the surrounding sunlight was incomparably dazzling, causing his eyes to hurt. However, he didn't dare to close his eyes. He only stared blankly at the person in front of him. His vision gradually cleared. The face that he had missed for countless days and nights finally appeared in front of him again. Her eyebrows were like distant mountains and her black eyes were like stars. Chu Ning's heart beat quickly, and the blood in his body seemed to be boiling at this moment. His voice was very soft, and because he hadn't spoken for a long time, his voice was unbelievably hoarse. However, Chu Liyue still heard it clearly. She quickly wiped away her tears and outlined a bright smile. Father. It's me. The familiar voice entered his ears, knocking on his eardrums. Even his heart felt as if it had been hammered a few times by something. Chu Ning was stunned. The bright sunlight was so piercing that his tears flowed silently. This familiar eyebrows. This familiar voice. It's you. It's really her. The corners of Chu Ning's mouth moved, and he suddenly raised his hand as if he wanted to touch Chu Liyue's face. However, halfway through raising his arm he suddenly fell weakly. His body was too weak and he couldn't even complete such a simple action. Chu Ning smiled bitterly. It's all because father is useless. Unexpectedly. I can't even hug our you. Even he himself didn't know how he had endured such a long time. He only thought that he couldn't leave you behind. Just like that, day after day it seemed that the darkness would never end. But today finally, Chu Liyue's tears fell again. However, the smile on her face was even more brilliant and bright. She said softly, Father is here to take you home. Digression. An author who was beaten down by her period has no right to ask for more chapters. See you tomorrow. Mobile users, please browse and read. A better reading experience comes from the Love Network. Chapter 1656. Prep, prep, prep. The black-robed man clapped his hands and said with a faint smile, "What a touching scene. Shangguan Liue, as long as you give me that thing now, you can take him back immediately. Father and daughter are reunited. Isn't that so?" Chu Ning suddenly came back to his senses when he heard the voice. He turned his head and looked at the black-robed man. His eyebrows suddenly knitted together. This man had taken him away from the wilderness and trapped him in this cage. It turned out that he wanted to threaten you. What does he want from you? Chu Ning grasped the bars of the cage tightly and asked worriedly. Although his body and mind were on the verge of collapse, he was still clear-headed when it came to you. This man was so powerful that it was beyond his imagination. What could a man like him not have? It could be imagined that the thing he wanted was definitely not ordinary, since it could make him go through so much trouble. It was very likely that it was something extremely important to you. What exactly does he want? Chu Ning stared at Chu Liyue. I don't want you to make such a big sacrifice for me. Chu Liyue smiled comfortingly. Father, don't worry. Since I'm here, I've already made my decision. Nothing is more important to me than you. Chu Ning's heart ached and ached for her. He was smart. From Chu Liyue's answer, he was sure that what the black-robed man wanted to exchange with her was definitely a rare treasure. What was more, it was extremely important to her. Chu Ning shook his head and said slowly and firmly, "No. I'm already an arrow at the end of its flight. The reason why I've been able to hold on until today is because I want to see you again. Now that I've seen you, I have no more regrets in my heart." He didn't know what kind of agreement you had with the black-robed man, but he was sure that you must have made a concession. In the past, I've never been willing to let you suffer, and now, it's still the same. Chu Ning looked deeply at Chu Liyue and his voice became weaker and weaker. It was just a matter of life and death. He didn't want you to suffer even more pressure and pain because of him. Father, there's not much I can do for you. Cough cough. The only thing I can do is to not drag you down. Cough cough. Chu Liyue frowned slightly. Father, we are father and daughter. We are connected by blood. How could this be considered a burden? Saving you is what I should do. She didn't finish her sentence. Chu Ning looked at her with deep eyes and suddenly smiled. This glance, this smile was already worth 1,000 words. He said, You've worked hard these past few years. Chu Liyue's heart seemed to have been hit by something. She pursed her lips. Actually, he should have thought of it earlier. Ever since she left Yaochen, returned to Tianling and came to the Divine Ruins world, so many things had happened in such a long time. How could he not know anything? She could openly admit that she was from Shangguanyu in front of everyone. However, she still subconsciously returned to being Chu Liyue in front of Chu Ning. Is timid by nature. Why did her temperament suddenly change so much and become another person? Even if her appearance and figure are exactly the same and her memory is exactly the same, but no one knows a daughter better than a father. Chu Ning gently closed his eyes. Of course he already knew. Even if everything was correct, there were still some things that he could sense. Chu Liyue's hand slowly tightened. In fact, Chu Ning had suspected her identity a long time ago. She thought that she hid it well and that he believed her. But she didn't expect. Ever since you became my daughter, I haven't been able to do anything for you. On the contrary, you have done so much. A trace of guilt appeared on Chu Ning's face. She was extremely outstanding. He was proud of her and also proud of her. Is gone, but the heavens have lowered the curtain and brought you here. If possible, I want you to be my daughter for the rest of your life. But I was too greedy in the end. At this point, he didn't want to drag her down. You have a great future ahead of you. Everything you have today is because of your hard work. There's no need to compromise again and again because of me. Chu Ning opened his eyes. His weary eyes were suffused with red. He wanted to live like this for the rest of his life, but if there's a chance in the next life, Father. Chu Liyue suddenly opened her mouth and interrupted him. Her voice was very soft, but her eyes were incomparably sincere. She looked at Chu Ning, almost looking into his heart. Father, is your daughter. She was in the past now and in the future. Therefore she had to save this person today. As she spoke, she straightened up and looked at the black-robed man. Then she closed her eyes and held her breath in concentration. Just as Chuning reacted to her words, he saw her suddenly stretch out her hand. After a short moment of silence, a strange totem suddenly appeared in her palm. Then the totem gradually floated up and condensed into a longan-sized water droplet at a speed visible to the naked eye. The water droplet was dazzling. The totem was engraved on its surface and could be seen clearly. From afar, it looked like a precious treasure that was meticulously carved out of colorful jade. The brilliance flowed and had a myriad of charm. Chuning's heart seemed to be tightly gripped by something. Although he didn't know what it was, he could feel that it was definitely not an ordinary item. Moreover, it seemed to be extremely important to you. When the water droplet appeared, her face seemed to have paled a little. As for the black-robed man, after seeing the water droplet, there was an obvious fluctuation in his aura. Chu Liwei stared ahead and then flicked her wrist. Since you want it, take it. Zhoosh. The black-robed man flicked his sleeve and snatched the water droplet in a hurry. A ball of thick black fog gushed out from his palm and quickly enveloped the water droplet. At a glance, the originally brilliant water droplet seemed to be covered with a layer of shadow and became much dimmer. The dense pressure and aura on it seemed to be suppressed in an instant. Soon, the water droplet fell into the black-robed man's palm. He looked greedily at the water droplet in his hand. Because of his excitement, even the surrounding space began to fluctuate. Finally, in order to find this item, he had spent a lot of time and suffered a lot of torture. Now this item had finally fallen into his hands. Chu Liwei said coldly. Now can you let go of my father? The black-robed man reluctantly moved his gaze away from the water droplet and looked up at Chu Liwei. You're quite obedient. He originally thought that she would play some tricks, but now it seemed that he had worried too much. Just for Chuning she would give up such a precious treasure. Only she would do such a stupid thing. He laughed complacently and gloomily. Sure. Mobile users, please browse for a better reading experience from Love Network. Chapter 1657. As he spoke, he waved his other hand gently. The black cage instantly transformed into countless black light spots and scattered in all directions. Chuning's body was freed from the cage and suddenly loosened. His body fell to the side uncontrollably. Right at this moment, a gentle force flew over and gently supported his body. Then Chuning felt that his whole body was surrounded by this force, which then sent him to the side. He subconsciously wanted to break free, but from the corner of his eye he happened to see Rongxiu standing at the side. In an instant he suddenly understood. This should be Rongxiu's move. Sure enough, with the help of this force his body quickly reached Rongxiu's side. Lord Chuning. Rongxiu stretched out his hand and helped him up. Chuning looked at this familiar face. Your Highness Princely. No, Your Highness's current identity should be the Holy Sun? He didn't know much about Rongxiu, but he had heard some things. Rongxiu's lips curved slightly. You and I are already engaged. You can just call me Rongxiu. Hearing the two words, Chuning immediately reacted and immediately grabbed Rongxiu's wrist tightly. Yes, you could quickly help you. If that thing was really taken away by the black-robed man, then Chi. Suddenly a sharp sound broke through the air. Chuning was shocked and hurriedly looked back. When he saw the scene in front of him clearly, a trace of shock and worry flashed across his eyes. This was because the countless black light spots that previously transformed into numerous black light pillars once again rushed toward Chu Liui's surroundings. In the blink of an eye, it formed an incomparably strong cage which completely locked Chu Liui. Chuning was shocked and angry at the same time, looking at the black-robed man angrily. You despicable! The black-robed man laughed in a low voice. You are the owner of this thing. How can I not take you away? He wanted to make this thing completely his. Therefore he had to deal with Shangguan Yu as well. Chu Liui stared fixedly at him, her red lips suddenly forming a cold arc. So you're saying that you've decided not to let me go? This thing has already recognized you as its master. Even if I take it away, it won't listen to me. So what? The black-robed man raised his hand and clenched his fist. The black pillar of light surrounding Chu Luiyue instantly emitted an astonishing pressure. The surrounding space began to shrink crazily, squeezing toward her. Chu Luiyue felt a tightness in his chest and blood flowed out from the corner of his mouth. Unfortunately, I only know of one way to solve this problem. That is to kill you. Of course, if you know of other ways, it's not a bad idea to share them. Maybe I can spare your life. The black-robed man's tone was high and mighty, as if he could decide Chu Luiyue's life and death with just a thought. The qi and blood in Tu Ning's body churned, and he was about to charge forward without a care. Rong Xiu grabbed his arm. Lord Chu Ning, you're in danger. Chu Ning turned around anxiously and was about to say something, but he met Rong Xiu's calm eyes. He was suddenly stunned. He knew how Rong Xiu treated you. However, he didn't seem to be worried at all. Could it be that he still had a trump card? Or did you have other plans? Rong Xiu's thin lips curved slightly. You will definitely return safely. Don't worry. As his voice fell, the black-robed man laughed mockingly. Haha, what a joke. Shangguan Yu, this thing is equivalent to your core of essence. Now that it's separated from you, you're equivalent to a piece of trash with no combat ability. What else do you have to fight me with? These people were too naive. But after hearing his words, Chu Luiyue's face did not show any signs of panic. Instead, she even smiled. She raised her hand and slowly wiped the blood from the corner of her mouth. Her eyes were filled with killing intent. She said, "You're right. This core of essence is extremely important to any cultivator. Unfortunately, you forgot one thing." Swoosh. A beam of snow-white light flashed in an instant. The red cloud sword appeared in her hand. The blade was sharp and the cold light was biting cold. Now, its owner is still me. Boom. A vast and majestic force suddenly gushed out from the water droplet. The layer of black fog surrounding the water droplet was completely washed away in an instant. The boundless pressure instantly collapsed like a dam, and a torrential flood surged down majestically. The black-robed man sensed that something was wrong. His heart sank and he raised his hand to seal it again. However, just as he moved, the force surged toward him. His body was instantly flung away. How is this possible? When he finally regained control of his body, he immediately looked up at the water droplet with a face full of disbelief. This thing was incomplete. How could it have such shocking power? How is it impossible? Chu Luiyue sneered. This thing had been with her for many years, devouring her force day and night. After accumulating for a long time, it had already reached a terrifying level. Even if this black-robed man's strength had reached the level of a god, it would be extremely difficult to control it. She had gone through life and death to finally subdue this thing. Now someone had suddenly appeared and wanted to snatch it away without a word. How could she agree? Chu Luiyue slowly tightened her grip on the red cloud sword, and the force around her began to surge violently. She said word by word, "I hate it when people snatch my things." Swoosh. The water droplet quickly flew back and rushed into Chu Luiyue's body. Chu Luiyue's aura surged. The next moment she tapped the ground with the tip of her foot and leaped out. She raised the red cloud sword high. The energy of heaven and earth trembled violently and crazily gathered. Red cloud sword. The cold rainbow light tore through the air and instantly slashed toward the black-robed man. Her series of actions were too fast, and the black-robed man couldn't react in time. In a hurry, he could only raise his hand to block it. Clang. The red cloud sword landed on his sleeve, and it was as if it had cut black iron, producing an extremely crisp sound of collision. Swoosh. The red cloud sword ruthlessly scratched the sleeve, leaving a pale white mark. At the same time, the man borrowed the force and quickly retreated. He looked down at his sleeves and suddenly smiled sinisterly. "Your red cloud sword is indeed powerful. Last time my clone suffered a loss because of this. But, do you think I will let you win a second time?" Chu Luiyue's eyes narrowed dangerously. No wonder this man wanted her to come here. Although he didn't have a physical body, this black robe was not ordinary. There weren't many things that could withstand the red cloud sword, but it only left a mark on this black robe. "Since you want to fight with me, then don't blame me for being impolite." The black-robed man crossed his hands in front of him. Boom. In an instant, heaven and earth changed color. Mobile users, please browse for a better reading experience from Love Network. Chapter 1658. Chu Luiyue looked up. Dark clouds were quickly gathering in the sky. Rumbling sounds came from the thick layers of clouds with great momentum. Chu Luiyue's eyes flashed with a hint of sternness. This man did not pause at all. The moment he attacked, he caused the sky to change color and the force to tremble. This showed how powerful he was. You do have some ability to make it recognize you as its master. However, a mere exalted god wants to fight me head-on. I don't know if I should call you naive or stupid. The black-robed man's voice was filled with shocking anger. A cloud of black mist quickly condensed in his palm. The surrounding force of heaven and earth also began to surge crazily. In just a moment, the cloud of black mist condensed into a black palm. This palm was the same size and shape as his hand, but it was condensed by black mist and there seemed to be dark red veins on the surface. It looked very terrifying. Chu Luiyue's pupils shrank. From the looks of it, it was extremely similar to the hand that was suppressed under the myriad wine mountain. It was just that the one in front of him was much smaller than that, and the aura of suppression was also different. Could it be, were they from the same sect and origin? Or were they cultivating the same type of cultivation technique? Many guesses flashed through Chu Luiyue's mind. Silent, scorching palm. The black-robed man shouted in a low voice. The palm began to fly toward Chu Luiyue. Its speed was not fast, but wherever it passed, the surrounding space would silently collapse. Most importantly, as it approached Chu Luiyue, it was still constantly devouring the surrounding energy. The suppression on it became more and more powerful. At the same time, the man waved his sleeves and countless black light spots fell from the sky. Chu Luiyue immediately felt a weight on his body, as if something heavy was pressing down on him. Every movement of his seemed to become difficult and slow. God domain. The god domain of a venerable god was indeed incomparable to an exalted god. Chu Luiyue just stood there and felt as if his body was about to explode. She wanted to wave Scarlet Heaven's sword, but found that she could not even do a simple action like raising the sword in the opponent's god domain. A venerable god artifact is indeed a good treasure. Unfortunately, your realm is too far away from mine. In the face of absolute power, any auxiliary power would become meaningless. Chu Luiyue was trapped in the same place and the black palm was getting closer and closer. Blood flowed from the corner of her mouth again. Every part of her body seemed to have been ruthlessly crushed by something. The intense pain caused her face quickly turned pale, and her body as if she would collapse at any moment. Her hands that were holding the sword began to tremble. Chu Ning, who was standing in the distance, saw this scene and his heart almost stopped beating. If it weren't for Rongxiu taking care of him, he would have died by now. Chu Ning suddenly thought of something and looked at Rongxiu. At this time, Rongxiu, was he still not going to make a move? Rongxiu was also watching the battle with a focused expression. However, there was no shock or anxiety in his eyes. It was as if he was waiting for something. That black palm was already right in front of Chu Luiyue and was about to land on her body. At this moment, Scarlet Heaven's sword in her hand finally moved. Endless elemental power gushed out from the water droplet and spread to her limbs and bones. Chu Luiyue's aura rose again. She swung her sword. Swish. The sharp and bright blade slashed down from the middle of the black palm. One hand was instantly cut into two halves. However, seeing this scene, Chu Luiyue suddenly felt uneasy. Sure enough, in the next moment, the two halves of the palm actually condensed once more and they formed two identical hands. The most terrifying thing was that the power and aura on it did not seem to be reduced at all. Chu Luiyue's heart sank. Then the two hands flanked Chu Luiyue from the left and right. The feeling of being restrained returned once again. This silent burning palm can devour all the attacking power. Unless you are also a venerable god expert and can break it, otherwise, as long as you continue to attack, it will only continue to become stronger. The black-robed man laughed sinisterly. In this case, do you still want to continue? The more she resisted, the worse the result. Chu Luiyue stared at the two palms in front of her as countless thoughts flashed through her mind. She did not doubt the truth of the other party's words. His realm and strength were indeed much higher than hers. As a venerable god, forcefully fighting against a venerable god expert was like a mantis trying to stop a chariot. It seemed that she had to think of another way. Chu Luiyue's mind raced, and then she directly stabbed Scarlet Heaven's sword into the ground. Since she couldn't beat him, wouldn't it be fine if she didn't fight? Her sudden action stunned the black-robed man for a moment. Was she going to admit defeat? It didn't seem to be. Clang. Chu Liyue took out a black shield and placed it in front of her. The black shield looked very shabby and unremarkable. However, the moment he saw the black shield, the black-robed man's hands in his sleeves instantly tightened. Chu Liyue did not notice this. After placing the shield in front of her, she simply sat down cross-legged. She took a deep look at the black-robed man opposite her and then slowly closed her eyes. She raised her hands slightly and several streams of light instantly appeared. Xian formation. At this moment, the black-robed man finally realized what Chu Liyue was trying to do. The strength of a martial artist could not fight against him, so she wanted to use a Xian formation. After understanding Chu Liyue's plan, the black-robed man's first reaction was to laugh. Did she think that she had the confidence to turn the tables? A Xian master could indeed display power that exceeded his own strength, but there was a limit to it. Moreover, if she wanted to display such a level, she would have to construct an extremely complicated Xian formation. At this moment, Chu Liyue did not have the time. What? Just as this thought flashed through his mind, he saw that a palm-sized Xian formation had already appeared in front of Chu Liyue. Although the Xian formation was small, the pressure on it was not to be underestimated. Once it was used, its power would definitely be extraordinary. A trace of shock flashed through the black-robed man's heart. How could she be so fast? Mobile users, please browse for a better reading experience from Love Network. Chapter 1659. At this moment, his two black palms had already closed in on Chu Liyue and were about to succeed. However, when they were a step away from Chu Liyue, they suddenly stopped and were unable to take another step forward. It was as if there was something terrifying in front of them that made them fearful. The black shield stood silently in front of Chu Liyue. At a glance, there was nothing special about it. However, the two black palms finally stopped and refused to move forward. The black-robed man seemed to have expected this as he gritted his teeth and said, "I actually forgot that you still have this trump card." His voice was cold and resentful. Chu Liyue closed her eyes and was still constructing the Xian formation in front of her as if she didn't hear it. Or maybe she heard it but she didn't care. Since the battle at Myriad Wine Mountain, she knew that compared to Crimson Heaven Sword, this black shield was the true trump card of her trump cards. When she faced such a terrifying attack at that time, she relied on this black shield to survive, let alone now. This black-robed man was strong, but he wasn't so strong that he was invincible. Even if she couldn't defeat him, it wasn't that difficult for her to survive. Under the protection of the black shield, this battle that didn't have any suspense came to a halt. The scene seemed to be frozen, allowing time to flow slowly. Only the Xian formation in front of Chu Liyue was expanding and becoming more and more complicated. Let's see how long you can hide. She could temporarily hide behind the black shield and buy some time for herself. However, she couldn't be like this forever. As for the Xian formation, he didn't think that Chu Liyue had the ability to do so. Both parties were in a stalemate. Chu Ning's gaze swept across the few of them as he frowned. He roughly saw the current situation, but he still felt that there were many things that were very strange. Why did the black-robed man want to snatch Yu Er's pill of origin? Yu Er wanted to use the Xian formation to fight with the opponent, but he didn't know if it would work. Furthermore, the black-robed man didn't even look at them from the beginning to the end. He didn't make a move against Rongxiu, and Rongxiu also watched from the side and didn't make a move. What exactly was going on with them? Unable to figure it out, Chu Ning gave up. He clenched his fists and prayed in his heart. "Yu Er, you must come back safe and sound." Nan Yuxing and the others finally slowed down after making sure that no one was chasing after them. There were 4 of them in total. Nan Yuxing and Elder Bai Tong were heavily injured, while Nan Yi was lightly injured. Only Elder Wu Peng's situation was slightly better. However, losing a King Divine artifact that he had personally refined was not a small blow to him. The few of them found a place to rest, and only then did they carefully treat their injuries. Nan Yuxing was still fine. They hadn't fought head-on. His anger had attacked his heart, causing his internal injuries to worsen. However, it was still within a manageable range. Elder Bai Tong's situation was the worst. A section of his calf was cut off. Even though he was a celestial physician, the only thing he could do now was to stop the bleeding and heal his wounds. That section of his calf had been completely crushed, and he didn't even have the chance to sew it back together. This would have a huge impact on any cultivator. They were all silent and the atmosphere was cold and stifling. After a long while, Nanny finally couldn't help but ask. That man, who is he? When did such a person appear in the god-slaying mound? His strength was unbelievably strong and he even said that it was his territory. At first they thought that he was just saying it casually. However, what happened later made them suspicious. He doesn't look like he's from the outside world. However, in the battle tens of thousands of years ago, all the god-level experts were killed and their souls destroyed. Moreover, the energy here is violent. Ordinary people can't stay here for more than a year. Otherwise, it's very easy for them to die because they can't withstand the violent energy here. Nanyu Xing frowned and muttered to himself. Elder Wu Peng suddenly said. He's not a normal person. He's just a soul. That's why he's so strong. Isn't that even more suspicious? Nanyu Xing rubbed his forehead. Ordinary cultivators without a physical body would have their strength greatly reduced. However, that wasn't the case for that black-robed man. There's also that Zhou Xian. I've heard some rumors about him before, but I didn't pay much attention to him. Now that I've seen him today, I know that his strength has reached such a level. At the mention of this, Nanyu Xing couldn't help but clench his teeth. Resentment, jealousy, unwillingness. He had always prided himself on being outstanding, but today he was dim in front of that man. How could he feel good? Elder Wu Ping said in a deep voice. This Zhou Xian is hiding his strength. When we go back, we must investigate him carefully. Here. Zhou Xian recognized them immediately. It was obvious that he knew them well. He even called out Nan Yifen's name in such a casual tone. This was another hidden concern in Elder Wu Peng's heart. They were all silent for a moment. If Zhou Xian wasn't bluffing, then, look, something seems wrong over there. Nanny looked back and suddenly exclaimed. They all looked over. The sky in the distance had unknowingly become gloomy. There seemed to be lightning flashing vaguely. They're fighting? Nanyu Xing suddenly realized something and sneered. No matter how powerful they are, they're definitely not that man's match. I'm afraid they're all going to die in that man's hands. Wind, clouds, and thunder. The energy of heaven and earth kept surging. Chu Liuyue's hair was lifted by the wind. The oppressive feeling around her seemed to have become stronger. Chu Liyue frowned slightly. Although the black shield could help her block most of the attacks, it couldn't completely isolate all the power. The black-robed man's god domain was indeed too terrifying. If this continued, she was afraid that before she could cast the Xian formation she would clatter. A stone suddenly fell out of Chu Liuyue's universe ring. The black-robed man was stunned when he saw this scene. Why did a stone suddenly appear? Clatter. Immediately after, the second stone fell. Then more and more stones appeared. Digression. I'm going out to do something today, so I might be late when I get home, so I won't let everyone wait. I'll update it tomorrow. Chapter 1660. Soon the ground around Chu Liyue was littered with stones. It was messy and did not seem to follow any rules. The black-robed man was even more confused. Why did so many stones suddenly appear out of nowhere? Could it be that Shangguan Yu needs the power of these stones to set up a Xian formation? But these ugly stones are ordinary. What's so good about them? However, for some reason they look familiar. Splash. The faint sound of waves was suddenly heard. The sound was very soft. If one did not listen carefully, they would not be able to hear it clearly. However, the surroundings were very quiet at this moment, and the black-robed man's attention was focused on Chu Liyue, so he happened to hear this sound. Just as he was puzzled, a blue stream of light suddenly surged out from one of the stones. The originally powerful pressure that was almost suffocating seemed to have been torn open by this blue stream of light. The black-robed man finally realized something. This is a god domain. There was a hint of disbelief in his voice. It was not only because of the god domain that suddenly flowed out of the stones, but also because he finally remembered why these stones looked so familiar. Aren't these the broken tombstones from the tomb of the exalted gods? Why did these things suddenly appear in Shangguan Yu? The black-robed man had a bad feeling. He vaguely felt that he seemed to have overlooked something important. While he was in shock and hesitating, more and more god domains surged out from the stones. These god domains were scattered and almost every one of them was very small and weak. However, many little drops made an ocean. At this point there were at least hundreds of stones scattered around Chu Liyue. Together there were hundreds of god domains. Most importantly, these god domains seemed to have some kind of tacit understanding with each other. With Chu Liyue as the center, they surrounded her and surged silently, tearing holes in the invisible pressure. Silently, Chu Liyue was already completely surrounded and protected by these god territories. The pressure around her suddenly decreased, causing Chu Liyue to open her eyes in shock. When she saw the rocks and the divine territory around her, she was shocked. This was because she had been thinking about how to complete the Xian formation as soon as possible to defend against the black-robed man's attack. He didn't expect that these stones would come out of the interspatial ring by themselves. And, he's even taking the initiative to protect me? Chu Liyue blinked and thought for a moment. She didn't even have time to summon her divine realm before. Then she lifted her gaze and looked at the black-robed man again. Even though she couldn't see his face, she could keenly sense that his aura had become even more ferocious and dangerous. Seeing this scene, his mood probably wouldn't be too good. Thinking of this, Chu Liyue's lips curved up. With this huge help, her chances of winning were even higher. You actually took all of these for yourself? The black-robed man suddenly raised his hand and pointed at Chu Liyue. Shengguanyu, how dare you? Because of his agitation, his voice became a little sharp, but he quickly suppressed it as if he was worried about something. Chu Liyue raised her eyebrows slightly. Thank you for the compliment. You've known me for a long time. Do you only know who I am now? Actually, she didn't take these stones on her own accord, but they insisted on following her. She had no choice but to keep them in her interspatial ring. She didn't care much at first, but now, these stones seemed to be quite useful. The black-robed man was so angry that his hand that was pointing at Chu Liyue trembled slightly. You. However, after holding it in for a long time, he couldn't think of any rebuttal. Of course, he knew what these stones were, and that was why he was so shocked. Weren't they living well in my place? They had been living like this for tens of thousands of years. No matter how the weather changed, they remained indifferent and only maintained the same state. Why did they suddenly change when they met Shengguanyu? He couldn't figure it out. At the same time, he felt a little worried for the first time. Such a shocking change was definitely not a small matter. Moreover, with their help, it wouldn't be that easy to kill Shengguanyu again. He began to try to increase the pressure of his deity domain in an attempt to attack Chu Liyue again. However, hundreds of deity domains had already formed an extremely strong protective net around Chu Liyue. If he wanted to deal with Chu Liyue again, he would have to think of other ways. The black-robed man fell into a long silence as he looked at the countless deity domains floating in the air. Are those deity domains? Chu Ning frowned slightly and asked softly. Rongxiu nodded slightly. We accidentally bumped into these yesterday. They seemed to be fated with you, couldn't resist and brought them along. I didn't expect them to be so useful at such a crucial time. Chu Ning didn't say anything. Rongxiu looked around and saw that Chu Ning was still staring at the deity domains. He thought that Chu Ning was still worried about Chu Liyue, so he said, Don't worry. Don't worry. Although the individual might of these god territories isn't extremely strong, when gathered together, they can still unleash a great effect. Moreover, has her own deity domain, so she has her own deity domain? Yes. Just happened to break through to the high god realm some time ago. Due to the special circumstances, Rongxiu didn't explain in detail. Yu's deity domain didn't appear during this breakthrough. She already had it a few years ago. It was just that she suppressed her deity domain in Mount Pingmin during this period of time. So this is a deity domain. Chu Ning seemed to have understood something, and a look of realization appeared on his face. He lowered his eyes and looked at his hands. They were blood-stained and full of injuries. However, his eyes seemed to be looking at something else through his hands. Rongxiu felt that something was strange when he noticed Chu Ning's silence. Poor Chu Ning, what's wrong? Chu Ning retracted his gaze and shook his head. I just feel that has changed a lot after we parted. What was her cultivation level when we parted last time? Now she had grown to her current level. Xiao was about to speak when he heard Chu Ning's voice suddenly lower. She must have suffered a lot, right? He asked carefully, but there was an unconcealable sadness and heartache in his voice. Xiao's words were suddenly stuck in his throat. He looked at Chu Ning with a slightly deep gaze. Everyone could see that she was shining brightly. Only those who truly loved her could see her hardships and difficulties. After a long while, Xiao slowly tightened his hands in his sleeves and said, "Don't worry. I'm here. I'll make sure that she's safe and happy." Mobile users, please browse for a better reading experience from Love Network. Chapter 1661. The Xian formation in front of Chu Luyue was gradually being completed. A terrifying aura was being emitted from the formation. At the same time, dark clouds were gathering in the sky and the wind and thunder were howling. The uneasiness in the black-robed man's heart grew stronger. When he made his move just now, he had caused a phenomenon in heaven and earth. However, when Chu Luyue's Xian formation was completed, he was shocked to realize that her ability to summon the energy of heaven and earth seemed to be slightly better than his. This made his already anxious heart feel even more uncomfortable. I can't let this go on. He had spent a lot of effort to lure Shangguanyu here. If he couldn't take her down today, it would be difficult for him to find such an opportunity in the future. Furthermore, this woman's strength had always been increasing at an unimaginable rate. In the beginning, he didn't take her seriously at all. However, as the days passed, she was now able to make him feel threatened. If he delayed any longer, perhaps one day Shangguanyu would surpass him. Who knows? When that time came, wouldn't all his years of planning go to waste? When he thought of this, he finally made up his mind and raised his hand. He didn't have a physical body. Instead, he was a translucent soul in his black robe. At this moment, he stretched out his hands and a black fog appeared. The strange black fog lingered around his hands and then quietly dissipated. However, when his hands reappeared, they were different from before. They were thinner and even looked like skeletons. They carried an unconcealable evil aura. Swoosh! A dark light flashed past his palms. Suddenly, a black wooden stick appeared. The wooden stick was about the thickness of an adult's arm. It was dark in color and its surface was rough with many scratches. However, the top of the wooden stick was very round and seemed to be engraved with red veins. However, the color was extremely dim and didn't stand out when compared to the black color. If one didn't look carefully, they wouldn't notice it. However, the black wooden stick had a very good texture and seemed to be quite heavy. The black-robed man slowly clenched his fists. The energy of heaven and earth in the surroundings suddenly surged towards him. Then all of it poured into the wooden stick. In an instant, smoke and dust filled the air. Noticing the commotion, Chu Liyue quickly looked up to take a look. Her gaze lingered on the black wooden stick for a moment. With just one glance, her heart suddenly trembled. This thing, I'm afraid, is not simple. She held her breath and concentrated, speeding up the drawing of the profound formation in front of her. A strange blood-red rune suddenly appeared on the black wooden stick. The appearance of this rune seemed to have opened a layer of restriction, causing the black wooden stick's aura to rise once more. The first layer of the brilliant heaven staff. Wave breaker. He gripped the black wooden stick tightly with both hands, raised it high and then slammed it down hard. Boom! The black wooden stick landed heavily on the ground, exploding with an earth-shattering boom. Crack! A gully instantly appeared on the ground. A tyrannical and violent power swept out. The ravine also began to extend towards Chu Liyue at an astonishing speed. Everywhere it passed, space was unable to endure this sudden and terrifying force, and it collapsed soundlessly. In the blink of an eye, he was already in front of Chu Liyue. Crush! The energy of heaven and earth around Chu Liyue was greatly affected by this attack, and it began to spread wildly to the side. The countless divine domains around her were also gradually surging up and down like waves. The black-robed man stared at the scene in front of him. The brilliant sky staff was his trump card and it was extremely powerful. However, every time he used it, he would expend a lot of energy and it would take him at least 3 months to recover. Therefore, he rarely used it. Originally, he did not want to use it today. After all, it was not difficult for him to deal with Shangguanyu. However, he did not expect her to have so many trump cards. Furthermore, she had even taken those stones that contained divine domains for her own use. Helpless, he could only do this. As long as he could end the battle quickly, everything else could be temporarily put aside. The brilliant sky staff had a total of 3 layers of power. Each layer was stronger than the previous one, but the impact on him was also greater. However, even the first layer was enough to deal with her. Crush. The sound of the surging waves became clearer and clearer in his ears. Chu Liwei could even see that the divine domains around her were also greatly affected, and they were on the verge of collapse. It was as if they would be destroyed by that terrifying power at any time. The surrounding environment was unstable, and she could not continue to focus on the Xian formation. But she was so close. Chu Liwei frowned slightly. Then she suddenly thought of something and had a thought. Whoosh! Countless stones rolled out from the universe ring, and in a short while they covered her body. Several divine realms rushed out of these stones and merged with the previous ones. Very soon, the divine realm that was still on the verge of collapse became stable again. As for that energy, it was finally completely blocked outside and was unable to move forward in the slightest. How is this possible? The black-robed man was shocked by the scene in front of him. Just now he had made up his mind to finish off Shang Guanyu, and he did not hold back at all. How is she so strong? No, that's not right. To be more precise, she had too many stones on her. Did she empty the tombs of the exalted gods? Chu Liuyue's lips curled into a smile. Looks like this move of yours is only as a wave breaking. If it was a huge wave, it would not be so easy for him to break it. Boom. The two forces collided fiercely, but Chu Liue's divine domain did not fluctuate at all. On the contrary, the black-robed man's strike was quickly collapsing. Looking at the scene before him, the black-robed man was first shocked, then he trembled with anger. She actually withstood that strike. She did not even make a move from the beginning to the end. She only threw some stones. Are you crazy? In a moment of desperation, the black-robed man could no longer hold back and shouted at the stones. How dare you help her like this? Have you all forgotten who you are? This shout was obviously directed at the rocks. Although the scene looked very strange, Chu Liyue, who had dealt with these stones before, knew that they could understand human language. However, no matter how angry he was, no matter how loud he screamed, the rocks remained indifferent. There was no reaction at all. The black-robed man was furious. Are you all trying to rebel? No matter what, these stones came from the tombs of the exalted gods. However, this was the tombs of the exalted gods. And he was indeed an exalted god powerhouse. Chu Liyue's lips curled up slightly. Looks like they don't want to bother with you. Mobile users, please browse for a better reading experience from Love Network. You're tuning in to the Zhou Xian's Legacy YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.